Welcome to the regular March meeting of the Concord Zoning Board of Adjustment. We will follow, for the most part, our usual procedure this evening, which is to say we will take the cases in the order in which they appear in the agenda. We will ask the appellant to step forward, be sworn in, and offer whatever testimony he or she would like us to hear. We then ask the appellant to step down. We do request that the appellants confine themselves, if at all possible, to a 10-minute presentation. We will then ask the appellant to step down, and we will invite testimony from anyone in the audience who is in favor of the appeal. We ask that those who speak in favor or in opposition, and we will also invite that, confine themselves to a 5-minute or less presentation. Following those presentations, if there are any, we will check in with code enforcement to see if there are any comments from the code enforcement office. Following all of that, if there has been testimony that appears to bear factual clarification, the appellant will have the opportunity to offer that clarification, not new arguments, prior to our closing the public testimony portion of the hearing. In most cases, the board will continue, will consider and act on each case prior to moving on to the next case. We have a couple of variations on a theme, or at least one tonight. One is that the request for rehearing 0027-2023, we will defer until after we hear case 0026-2023. In the event that the board decides to grant a variance under the latter case, the former case will not be heard because it would be moot. So we won't hear that first, in the interest of preserving time. Speaking of preserving time, we have an unusually long agenda this evening. And so in consideration for those who follow you and the cases of those who follow you, please be brief and to the point, stick to the criteria for either the variance or the special exception. And please do not repeat yourself or what other people have said. That will be very much appreciated by the board and I think by your fellow appellants. We do have one case tonight which will be in its usual spot on the agenda, but which will only have a 4-member board. Is Keith Wust here? Yeah. Mr. Wust, you would have a 4-member board. We do not have a 5th member to sit on your case. In the event that your case, motion would still need to pass by 3 affirmative votes. In the event that you are not happy with the results, the fact that it was a 4-member board would not be grounds for a rehearing. Otherwise, there's no difference between being heard by a 4-member board or a 5-member board, but you do have the right to choose. Would you like to be heard tonight by a 4-member board?
It's dependent on when the next hearing is.
The next hearing would be the first Wednesday in April.
Which is the 5th.
The 5th.
And I will not be here that night, so I don't know if that would impact having a full board or not.
Depends on whether or not we can get.
Yeah. And we may have another alternate that night after the next council meeting, so.
So it would, that's when it would be heard next.
I won't be in town, so we can go forward with the.
Very good. Then that's what we'll do. Thank you. The first case then that we will hear this evening is case 0023-2023, 42 DeMonte Drive, Gateway Performance District. Home Depot USA is the owner. Prior to the hearing, the case must determine whether this request is materially different in substance or content than the request contained in case 20-06, heard and denied on May 3rd, 2006. The owner wishes to reduce required parking by replacing 27 spaces with outside sale and display areas and seeks a variance to Article 28.7.2E, Table of Off-Street Parking Requirements, Use H, Retail Trade, to reduce the number of required parking spaces by 27 from 660 required spaces to 633 spaces. Do we have someone here representing Home Depot? Please come forward. Swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but. Please have a seat over here on my right and give us your name as you testify, please.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Shea. I'm the store manager at the Concord Home Depot.
What would you like us to know, Mr. Shea?
I'm sorry?
Well, I guess the first question is, can you give us your views on why this is a new case versus the 2006 case?
Yeah. So the request here from the difference, I guess, from 17 years ago is it's about 1/3 of the parking spaces the previous store manager had requested for outside storage. So it's probably the biggest significant difference in the request. And I believe this request also includes a seasonal request that runs for the 16 spaces from March 1st to October 30th. I believe the other request was a permanent request.
Very good. Before we proceed then, I'll ask the board to consider whether or not they consider this a new case, starting with you, Nick. What do you think?
Well, I'm sure I was on that hearing, but I don't recall it. But I think that it sounds like it's materially different than what we allegedly heard 17 years ago.
Ted, Mr.
I
Evans?
would agree.
It's materially different, and the variance standard has changed since 2005.
I agree with everyone.
As do I. Would anyone care to make a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved, and is there a second?
I second.
Moved and seconded to consider this as a new case. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Please proceed.
Okay, so the request is for 27 parking spaces. I don't know if you have this.
Yes.
I can bring that up.
Okay, so if you look at the, what I indicated in green, those are 16 spaces I'm requesting for plant tables and soil and mulch to run from March 1st through October 30th, so that'd be a temporary request. Really for additional perennials, trees and shrubs, just to stay competitive with other Home Depots and Lowe's. And similarly, in red, the 11 spaces for shed displays. Slightly different request, that would be permanent. Those sheds would be built on site. They would be display sheds that would eventually be sold and replaced with different models. That location really doesn't impact the drivability or visibility of the building from Diamante Drive or any other roads, so that's why I selected, excuse me, those spaces.
Would you run through the criteria for the variance for us?
Sure. Any questions?
Yes, the five criteria, five stipulations for a variance.
Sure. So it won't take away any needed parking spaces and will increase our live goods and shed offerings to customers. Part of my argument is that the building was built and parking spaces, obviously, based on square footage, the 660 that are required really aren't needed based on our volume at this point. The building was built before the Tilton or the Hooks at Home Depot. Volume just doesn't support, the sales volume doesn't support the need for 660 spaces by any means. It'll increase the variety of goods sold without any public inconvenience. We've always sold lab goods and sheds. All this is going to do is increase the variety for customers. C would be pretty much the same answer. It would improve the variety of plants and shrubs. The value of the surrounding properties are not diminished. As I mentioned, the variance would not add additional noise or light to the perimeter of the building, nor would it alter views of the building from public roads or surrounding buildings. And the request would allow us to remain competitive in the home improvement arena with our competitors, including other Home Depots.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Shea? Yes?
So in order to be entitled to a variance, there has to be something unique about the property that makes it differently burdened by the zoning requirements. So what is unique about this property?
The unnecessary amount of parking spaces, I guess, at this point, based on the business.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions from the board? Good.
No, I think we're all set.
Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Is there anyone who wishes to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who wishes to be heard in opposition to it? Any comments from code enforcement?
I agree with you that this is a very different request than last time, and the approach is a little different as well. So we're looking at a reduction of the required parking as opposed to, the way they looked at it last time was more of a variance on the amount of outside display they were allowed. So in putting that in, the way they incorporated it into parking was different. So this way, if they're just not required to have those parking spaces, they wouldn't need the other variances that they applied for last time. So it's just a little different approach, just so that you're aware.
So the problem is just the parking?
The problem is just the parking. They won't exceed the percentages of outside display and storage this time because there's less of a ask.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shea.
Thank you.
With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed, and I will invite the board to discuss the case, starting to my far right, physically if not philosophically. Mr. Monahan.
I should have asked when the applicant was here, but I can ask code enforcement. What's the required spaces now?
It's still 660 required spaces. With this particular, in this particular case, I've never been on site and seen this parking lot full. I mean, the parking standards are, sort of unilaterally look at all retail the same way. And so some sites really need that many, some sites don't. So whether or not you think that that applies to this case is...
So there'll still be more than 600 spaces?
There'll still be more than 600 spaces, there just won't be 660 spaces, which is what's required.
Okay. I think I'm comfortable with the request. I think they've approached it properly. The seasonal nature of it is helpful. I appreciate their observation that what's unique about the property is they have more parking than they need. So
Very good.
there was an answer to that question. So.
Great, thanks. Ms. Spector-Mort?
I agree with Jim.
I'm okay with it too.
Move approval.
All right, we need to form the motion with the rationale according to the
I'll try to do it,
criteria.
Laura, okay. All right, I move
I'll help
approval.
you out.
Because certainly it's in the interest, public interest, the spirit of the ordinance is observed, substantial justice is done. I don't think it's going to diminish the value of the surrounding properties. And certainly the hardship, I think, is a requirement of having that many spaces when it's been demonstrated that rarely is that place ever fully utilized.
Would you say that such a large amount of paved parking area in and of itself has a tendency to create a peculiar characteristic for the lot?
I would.
And would you say that nothing about this would alter the essential character of the neighborhood?
I would.
The neighborhood has a character, and this is it.
Yeah.
Very good. Is there a second?
A second.
It's been moved to second. Any discussion? All in favor?
All right.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is granted. That brings us to our second case this evening, which is case 0024, 2023, 68 Store Street, Opportunity Quarter Performance District, Brixmore Capital SC LLC owner. The owner wishes to install building signage which exceeds the maximum area allowed and seeks a variance to Article 2869B, permitted building signs, to install combined sign area of 86.48 square feet where 31 square feet is allowed. Is there anyone here from Brixmore? Yes, sir. You swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
I do.
Thank you. Would you please give us your name as you testify?
Yes. My name's Andy Serrato, Serrato Signs, Worcester, Mass.
Why do you believe a variance is appropriate here?
The building size is longer than it is wide, and they treat the front of the building as the entranceway, and they're basing the front of the building as a square footage that's allowed for the whole building. If they took the side elevation, square footage wise, what we're requesting is less than what would be allowed. And it's basically the same type of setup as the Grill 110 at the opposite end of the same new buildings that were built. Grill 110 has 3 buildings, so it can be seen from all 3 sides, the street, the property, and then coming down the street.
This variance is for the area and the number of signs, is it not?
Just the area.
Just the area, okay. Can you give us an idea why the signs need to be the size they need to be? Why do they need to be so large?
I don't believe they're that large, they're 30 square feet altogether. The size of the letters are 18 inches. The size of the building, if you look at it, it fits proportionally on the building. I think anything smaller would just be lost, it wouldn't be seen.
Very good. Other questions from board members?
If they were looking at the long side as the front side, how much signage would you be permitted?
I would have to refer to this, it's so many square feet for the length, and there's 80
Right.
feet of length.
It's it's a 1-to-1, so I don't have the dimension. Do you know the dimension off the top of your head, what that side is? Looking for it on the plan, so it's 80 square feet.
You said it's 31 linear square feet in your memo.
Right, the side that we're asking for, I think the question was if it was measured on the long side of the building,
Yeah.
what the standard would be.
So the long
So
side,
to answer your question, the length of the building is 80 feet, so you'd be allowed 80 square feet. We're looking for 86. Part of the problem as well is they square the whole, the way this is being done, they square the siren and the drive-through sign. So that if you did it individually, it would fall underneath the 80 square feet as well.
Other questions from the board?
Yeah, can you walk me through that again, how the drive-through signage is impacted by this?
So you have, the siren is a circle, and then below is the word drive-through, the two separate signs. If you put a rectangle around it, is how they determine the square footage. If you took each sign separately, it would be less in square footage, which would get us underneath the 80 square feet.
Okay, so there's not a separate drive-through sign, this is all,
I'm sorry?
there's not a separate drive-through sign?
It is. If you look at the drawing, the word Starbucks, and then to the right of Starbucks is a drive-through sign with an arrow. And then on the front of, or the back of the building, it's the siren with the drive-through sign as well. Basically, what they're trying to do is they like to put the name of they put the main name on the largest section of the building. They put the siren, they identify the other sections of the building, and they like to have the drive-through with it to get people moving through traffically easy.
So this is gonna help people negotiate the parking lot, then, right?
Yes.
Other questions from board members? Ted?
Yeah, you just mentioned something that when you take these signs individually, they come under 80 square feet. Is that what you said?
Yes, sir.
But we're still looking for an additional 60 square feet or 50 square feet because 31 is allowed. Is that right?
Correct. And the comment, I was referring to a question that I picked up on earlier. They wanted to know the length of the side of the building, which was 80 feet. So if we were able to take that as our frontage, if we could use that 80 feet as our frontage and use that for our square footage, we would be falling pretty much with what was allowed by right.
I guess another one.
Sure, of course.
So in your opinion, then, is the nature of the siting of this building, because it's got a main drag, but it's got a big parking lot behind it where they want to attract people from also, that's the reason that there's additional square footage of sign required in this particular building?
The problem we need the additional square footage is because we're coming up with a square footage based on the front of the building, which is 30 feet. So I only have 30 feet to work with to come up with what I'm allowed for square footage for sign.
So a typical siting on a main drag, 30 square feet in the front of the building would be fine, because you wouldn't need signage in the back and on the side of the building, correct?
If the building was standalone facing just one
Right?
elevation.
I mean,
Correct.
so that's what's different about this building, is that what
Correct,
you're saying?
yes.
Thank you.
And at the very beginning, one of my comments was the very opposite end of that new complex here is Grill 110, and on all three sides, just to help identify the building, they have a sign.
Did they need a variance?
No, because the front of their buildings,
Because they got enough on the front of the, I got you. Okay,
that's correct,
thanks.
yes. I fumbled my way through that one, my apologies.
I just want to make sure I understand.
Other questions? Anyone? Thank you very much. Is there anyone here who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone here who would like to be heard in opposition to it? Any comments from code enforcement?
This is very similar to the other application you had on the other tenant in this building. It's the way the building is shaped. We're looking on the short side, basically, of things. Just to clarify, 110 Grill did not need a variance, and they did receive ADR approval for their signage. And that's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Serrano. With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. We heard testimony that the peculiar positioning of the building on the lot and the way the public accesses it from both sides creates a need for more signage than the ordinance would allow. I'm going to start this one at Mr. Evans' doorstep. What do you think?
Well, I think it meets the criteria. I think that it's not contrary to the public interest. I think the public interest would be served by having clear signage, because it's a place where a lot of people like to drive through. I think it does not vary from the spirit of the ordinance. I think substantial justice is served because of the unique character of the building.
Very good. Mr. Wallner, how does it look to you?
I agree, and the hardship for me is that the way it's located, you turn the building around 90 degrees and you really wouldn't be here for a variance request. So I think the unusual characteristic of the way it's laid out and where it's located meets the hardship requirement for me.
Inspector Morgan.
I agree. I think the extra signage will actually enhance the public health, safety, and welfare. And I don't think there'll be a diminution in surrounding property values adding an additional 50 feet of signage.
I have nothing to add.
Nor do I. I agree with my colleagues. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Yes.
It's been moved and seconded. The motion is based on the various findings of the various members of the board who've spoken. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is granted. You're all set.
I'll let you know tomorrow. You have to go to ADR next. I'll send you an email tomorrow.
All set? Okay, good.
Are we giving you enough information, Dr. Hutton?
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, that brings us to our next case this evening, which is case 0025, 2023, 22nd Street, RS Single Family Residential District. Joseph Picott, owner, wishes to renovate the second level of an existing attached garage structure to create an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, containing 750 square feet of living area, and seeks a special exception under Article 2824K, Table of Accessory Uses, Use A13, and Article 28552, Single-Family Detached Dwellings with one ADU. Do we have someone here from Mr. Picott?
Bless you.
Sir, thank you.
My first question for you, aside from do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, is, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
No, sir. Joseph Picott.
Picott.
Yes, sir.
I had 50-50 chance of getting it right. I do apologize. Please have a seat. And both of you, if you're both going to testify, announce yourselves as you do so. Thanks. You're still Joseph Picott, I assume?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Ma'am?
I'm Christy Charlesworth.
Last?
Christy Charlesworth.
Thank you. What would you like us to know?
So we'd like to, well, we asked for a variance for CDU?
Special exception.
Special
Special
exception.
acceptance.
There is,
right.
they are different criteria.
Oh, okay. So, for a dwelling for my mother to reside there. So it's already in a living space, an existing living space. When we bought the home, there's already a bathroom in there. There's already a space, but we just want to update it and make it more livable for her because she will be residing with us.
You do cover the criteria for a special exception in your application. Is there anything that you'd like to highlight in that or bring to special attention of the board?
Not at this time. I think, what I addressed was.
Very good. Are there other questions from the board members? No? Anyone? Very good. Is there anything else you'd like us to know?
I don't believe so, no.
Very good, thank you. Is there anyone here who,
Brief, as we asked.
yes, my new best friend. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak in opposition to this appeal or in favor of it? Is there any comment from code enforcement?
There is not.
And with that, we'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing. We have testimony in the application, and we heard testimony that the criteria for a special exception are met. The findings being, we have that list. Well, whoever is going to make a motion, if they will, can cover that ground. Discussion?
The memo from Dr. Hutton, you made an observation about the required 100 feet of road footage. Is that, are they compliant with that?
I think they have more than that.
They have more than enough,
Okay,
yeah.
I should have read through.
230 and a half.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good, thanks.
And I also have a question for Dr. Hutton. You said in addition to the special exception criteria, all the ADU criteria must be met? Are those
Right, so,
different?
yeah, so in the past, when you've looked at ADUs, they haven't met the ADU special exception criteria, so this is actually an ADU. It feels like that's the first time we've been able to say that in some time.
Okay.
So this is, it meets all of those criteria, the
Okay.
square footage and
Okay,
all of
okay.
that. In addition to the regular administrative special exception criteria, all the specific criteria
Okay.
are met.
Thank you.
Yep.
Those are, is a design standard.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Have any thoughts on this? How about you,
Well said.
Ted? Nick? Okay. Then would anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
And what will that motion be for?
I will make a motion to approve the requested special exception. And I can go through the criteria, or I can say based on the factual assertions made by the applicant in their application, which I find to be true and accurate facts. Does that work for everyone?
Works for me.
Yes,
Then I move to approve based on the factual assertions in the application.
second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The special exception is granted. That brings us to case 0026-2023, 0 Elm Street, Pennacook, 141PA// RN Neighborhood Residential District. Kathleen A. and Scott W. Preve, trustees. The owner wishes to construct a single-family dwelling and seeks a variance to Article 28.4.1H, Table of Dimensional Standards, to allow construction on a lot having 75 feet of frontage where a minimum of 80 feet is required.
Good evening, Chair and members of the board. Brett Allard with,
May I swear you in? You swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
I do.
Very good.
Good evening, everyone. Brett Allard with Shaughnessy Raish, legal counsel for the landowner, Kathy Preve, who is joined with me to my left. So by way of brief background, this is 0 Elm Street in Pennacook, tax map 141P Lot 8. It's about 1.6 acres. In the RN district, we have 75 feet of frontage on Elm Street, and it is served by municipal water and sewer. There's a small one-bay garage, a shed, and a shared paved driveway with 55 Elm Street next door. Otherwise, this property is vacant. The lot was created in 1906 by way of a subdivision plan back then that was recorded, so it is a pre-existing non-conforming lot of record, and it's been owned by my client's family since 1946, who also historically owned the abutting lot 55 Elm Street, where that shared driveway is. And historically, this lot was used in connection with my client's father-in-law's business. But now it's, at this point, really just used for storage in those outbuildings. So we're only 5 feet short of the required frontage. We have 75 where 80 is required. So we are seeking a frontage variance to allow construction of the single-family dwelling on this lot. That otherwise, both the lot and the proposed structure both otherwise comply with zoning. So that's it for the background. I'll just briefly go over the 5 variance criteria. The granting the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. We don't believe there will be any alteration to the essential character of the area. The proposed single-family dwelling is consistent with the single-family nature of the area. We don't see any threat to public health or safety. We are going to remove the paved portion of that shared driveway in favor of a dedicated access, new driveway that's dedicated to this lot as shown on the plan. So you won't have cars coming in and out of a shared driveway anymore. This will have its own safe, dedicated access, which we really think is a safety improvement over existing conditions. So we think that it would be not contrary to the public interest. Granting the variance will be consistent with the spirit of the ordinance, and really the spirit of frontage variances are a mechanism to avoid overcrowding and that type of thing. We do have sufficient buildable area here for the dwelling. It can be tied into municipal water and sewer, so we don't have to dedicate additional land to a well or a septic. The lot does have over 7 times the city's minimum lot size requirement. We have 70,600 square feet where only 10,000 is required. So we certainly do have sufficient buildable area here without worrying about overcrowding. And the proposed dwelling does fit entirely within the building envelope. So we're good there. Number 3, granting the variance will do substantial justice. As the board knows, this is the balancing test. We don't see any injury to the public if the variance is granted. We don't see any gain to the public if the variance is denied, really only loss to the applicant. And noteworthy, and it's in the application, the city has actually historically taxed this lot as though it was buildable. In 2011 to 2012, it had a land value basis assessed at $66,000 and change. 2021 to 22 had a land value basis for tax purposes of $115,000 and change, which is really beyond, exponentially higher than a value that could genuinely be assigned for a lot that's not buildable. So, my client has a justified historic expectation that this was a buildable lot. That is a relevant part of the substantial justice analysis, and we think it would be an injustice to deny the variance for that reason. So we think substantial justice would be done. Number 4, the values of surrounding properties will not be diminished. We're not seeking to build in any setbacks closer to any abutters than is otherwise allowed, such that the value of their properties could be compromised. Again, the dwelling fits within the building envelope. We are only asking for 5-foot deviation from the 80-foot requirement, because we do have that 75 feet. It's a single-family use, which is permitted by right, consistent with the character of the area, so we don't think the values of surrounding properties would be diminished. Number 5, unnecessary hardship. This lot does have several special conditions that distinguish it from others in the area. It's an old pre-existing non-conforming lot of record. We're only 5 feet short of the frontage requirement. We do have that shared driveway and several outbuildings, but it's otherwise vacant. And interestingly, if this board recalls, it was part of the administrative appeal that came before. That's now subject to the motion for rehearing that's on the agenda tonight. But assuming we need this variance, really the only reason we can't build by right on here is because my client's family also owned the abutting lot when the 80-foot frontage restriction came into place. Had they not also owned that lot, we could avail ourselves of the savings clause in the zoning ordinance and build this dwelling by right, even though we lack the 5 feet. So that's, I think, a pretty unique aspect here. So owing to these special conditions, we don't see a fair and substantial relationship between the purpose and application of the frontage, 80-foot frontage requirement. Again, no overcrowding, over 7 times the minimum lot size. The dwelling fits in the building envelope. We're going to fix up that driveway situation. So the purposes that the zoning ordinance is designed to protect, we don't think are threatened if the variance is granted. And again, this was historically taxed as a buildable lot. So we think it would be proper for the board to grant the variance. We think the proposed use is reasonable. It is a permitted use. And that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions or otherwise turn it back over to the board.
Questions from the board? Thank you very much. I believe there are no questions.
Thank you.
We'll check with the crowd and see if there's anybody to testify in favor or in opposition. Is there anyone here who wishes to testify in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who wishes to testify in opposition to it? Any comments from code enforcement? With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. And thank you very much, Mr. Allard.
Thank you.
And Ms. Preeve. Start with Mr. Monahan's end of the table here. How do you view this?
Yeah, I think that they've made a reasonable case for the relief. It is just a 5-foot differential in the frontage, and it's been an established lot for some time. So I'm generally supportive.
I agree, it's not going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood, which is consistent with this lot and with single-family homes. It's certainly not going to diminish surrounding property values. Hopefully, it will increase them by cleaning up the lot a little bit. It will improve safety by reconfiguring the driveway. And it's certainly unique given its non-conforming status and its history of common ownership.
I agree with everything.
I do, and also the unusual characteristic of the land is such, it's 1.6 acres, and it's long and skinny, makes it unusual, and I think to me that deals with the hardship issue also.
I agree with my colleagues as well. When we heard this case before, the problem had to do with the literal reading of the law. In this case, I think the law has created a hardship for the owner because of the configuration of the land. And so I would support a motion to grant. Would anyone care to make such a
I'll
motion?
make a motion to approve based on all the criteria that's been discussed.
Is there a second?
Second.
Do you have enough to work with there? Mm-hmm. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Right?
Is anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is granted. With that, do we need to take any formal action on the request for a hearing, or do we just not do it?
I think
can
it should
withdraw
be
it, can't they?
withdrawn if that, or,
Could I just ask that it be continued to next month, and then once the 30-day appeal clock expires, I'll withdraw it?
All right. Do I hear a motion to continue the request for a rehearing to next month?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I'm not sure by whom.
Take your pick.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The case is continued until next month's hearing. Which brings us to case 0034-2023. This is a case in which I have a conflict of interest, so I'm going to step down, and Mr. Wallner has agreed to chair the meeting in my stead.
All right, the next case before us is case 0034-2023, 262 Sheep Davis Road, GWP Gateway Performance District, Keith Donald Wurst, owner. Owner wishes to construct a second single-family dwelling on the lot and seeks a variance to Article 28-2-4H to allow two principal uses, single-family detached dwelling on one lot. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Great. Please take a seat, state your name, where you live, and tell us what you want to do.
Keith Wiest, and I'm at 262 Sheep Davis Road. Is it okay if I go into the overview?
Please.
Thank you. Thanks for hearing me tonight. I'm looking to have a second dwelling unit constructed on the lot, directly adjacent to the current residential space, for the purpose of additional family living space. I had immediate and extended family visit over the holidays from New Mexico and New Jersey, and while I had already been kind of thinking of it, second unit kind of put it higher on my priority list because it was cramped and wasn't ideal. The dwelling unit wouldn't be some looming large structure. It would be compliant with all the ADU guidelines outlined in the ordinance, with the exception of it being detached from the residence. It would not be attached, so technically it's an attached ADU. But regardless whether it's an ADU or second dwelling unit, it's non-conforming use in the Gateway District. So that's the reasoning for the variance request.
Can you address some of the hardship requirements, please?
Yeah, of course. So regarding the special circumstances, the building was constructed around 1950 prior to the Gateway Performing District being established, along with a few other residents, since this one was just knocked down last year, so there's just two left. But it's coexisted there for decades, and so it's quite a unique setting. And when I purchased it in 2020, I knew it wasn't in a residential zone, but I fell in love with the property and intend to live there with it being a residence going forward. So I think it's a unique hardship, given that ADUs are generally a standard reasonable use for residential districts, and given that this will be a use by me as a resident going forward, I think an ADU would be reasonable, or a second dwelling unit detached. The lot is deep, and if you can see on the map there, it would be directly north of the current residence, which is obscured by trees. So, while it's a unique hardship, it really does not impact any surrounding properties. It meets the requirements for distance from abutters, distance from the frontage, and the distance from all bluffs. That's a cliffside behind my house. So, the new property wouldn't affect any nearby owners, and I think that's it in regards to the hardship. Do you want me to continue along with the other criteria?
Please.
In regards to public interest, I think, well, I know that the benefit of the additional family living space would far outweigh any harm to the public interest, or there would be zero public injury. Neither Agway or Atlantic Broadband would be in any way affected. Those are my direct abutters. They would not be affected by this additional property space. In regards to the spirit of the ordinance, the proposed structure doesn't go against any planning goals of the city. It's not contrary to commercial zoning. It doesn't really impact the Gateway Performing District in any shape or form. There's no effect on the value of the area. In fact, it would increase the property value of my property, although it's not being used commercially. And I believe it's the minimum necessary relief, because without the variance, I can't add any ADU or any additional living space to my property for family use, and so it's the minimum necessary for reasonable use of a residence, because in all other residential districts, an ADU is allowed by right, and since this is currently and will be used as a residence going forward, I think it's reasonable. I think that's all 5.
I have a question for Dr. Hutton.
Yep,
Does he need a variance because it's not a permitted use or because it's not attached?
it's not attached. So traditionally, when there's when it's a single-family dwelling, if somebody wants to put a shed or another building on, we haven't treated those as expansions of non-conforming uses because,
Right.
just because that's how it's been done.
Yep.
So it's because it's not attached and it doesn't meet, wouldn't meet the special exception criteria anyways,
Oh, it wouldn't.
because it's not attached.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, why can't you attach it to the house?
I don't have any pictures of the house, but I can go over how it just logistically doesn't really work with my log cabin.
Please.
So on the southern end is my driveway, that's my bedroom, and then along the front right side is a porch, and then on the northeast end, the north end is a enclosed porch, and there's a door on the right side of the porch, which goes out to I constructed a bird viewing patio last fall, so that can't be, it could not be attached there. And on the northwest side is my utilities and my boxes, which goes down into my electrical panel, so you couldn't effectively attach it on the left side of that porch either. And then along the west side is my bathroom and my kitchen. So for me, the most cost-effective and logistically feasible route was to put it directly north within that forested area, following all ADU guidelines between 600 and 750 square feet. It would simply be a 1-bed, 1-bath with a kitchenette for my family when they visit.
So if that bird patio wasn't there, could it be attached there?
It could. It's my pride and joy.
Where's the
Appreciate
bird
that.
patio? Is that to the east?
It's directly on the northeast corner of the building, right outside to the right, right where her arrow is now. It's about 16 by 20 feet. 16 by 16. I guess in theory I could remove it, but I would.
Then you'd be dealing with a setback variance back there then.
I actually, thank you. The bluff has to be 50 feet from all bluffs, and 50 feet is just about from where, directly north of my house, I measured it.
50 feet to what? I'm sorry.
You want to go up and show us? Go ahead.
Hmm?
You want to show us?
Like get up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. That would actually be a lot easier. So about right here is a curved bluff. These are the river, and 50 feet is my property line. It's actually right around here, but the bluff ends a little bit after, I'd say. And this is about exactly 50 feet. I was initially looking along here, but this gets too close to Agway, and I don't want to affect them in any shape or form. This is away from everyone. It's hidden from the frontage, and it's 50 feet from the bluff.
So while you're up there, heading toward the river, is it an embankment? How steep is that there?
Can't say the exact grade. I mean, you wouldn't.
Is it flat?
Oh, is it flat?
Yeah.
No, it's sloped all the way down into it.
Okay,
Oh, that's nice.
on your property as well?
Your property looks pretty flat.
My property's perfect as
Oh, got it.
flat.
Okay, that helps.
So this is all flat, and then you run on the edge of the property line. It starts into a decline,
Okay.
fairly steep decline. But I measured it to make sure 50 feet was.
Is that a little stream too?
On the right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Sucook.
No, not the part, the, this.
Oh, no, that's just,
No, okay, that's a topo line.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
No, I think I'm all set.
Jim? Yeah. Laura?
No.
Is there anything else you'd like us to know?
oh, no, I just want to make sure I went through all the criteria adequately. I think I
While
did.
you're here, there was an observation from code enforcement that you'll be sharing, is this a septic system?
No, this is city water and sewer. I talked to the engineer regarding piggybacking.
Yeah.
The lines off from my main residence onto it, and I didn't get a definitive response, but he seemed inclined, given that it would probably be an ADU. I have not gotten a definitive response, but she stated if this was granted that they would be considered dual. I couldn't sell them separately, nor would I ever intend to.
Or condo them.
Right.
Okay.
Of course.
Thank you very much. You may step down. Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in favor of the request? Is there anyone who wants to be heard in opposition to the request? Dr. Hutton?
No, I think you covered all of my concerns in the memo.
And with that, I'll declare the hearing closed.
I'm having a little trouble with the fact that he could have asked for an ADU and attached it. And I'm a little uncomfortable with two primary uses on the lot. And then they're going to be sharing or piggybacking on water and sewer, and that makes me uncomfortable as well. So I'm not sure that the applicant is asking for the least variance here.
Well, we did hear there's some concerns about trying to attach it.
I think what I heard is it can't be attached and still comply with setbacks from the bluffs.
Right.
I'm not familiar with that. That seems like a long way off, but. I mean, what does it have to be attached by?
Oh, just that little
Common
corner.
wall.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how far away that is? Are you measuring it?
I'm measuring it. That is about your 50 feet right
Okay,
there.
yeah, so. It would have to be directly next to it, and that's where his bathroom and kitchen are.
Jim?
Yeah, this question for Dr. Hutton. See, the applicant kind of used the ADU and detached interchangeably. Is it?
It
an
is
ADU?
not an ADU because it is not
It
attached.
is not attached, okay.
And so we've had a lot of discussion in the code office recently about what it means to be attached. And what we're deciding is that it has to be a common living space wall. So if you have a breezeway that's just, open, either open, enclosed, but not heated, like not part of the living space, that is not attached in our opinion. So it has to be a common living space wall with a door that connects them.
So even if it was attached to the three-season porch, that wouldn't do it?
That would not do it.
Is the statute say attached, and you're trying to
It
figure out
does.
what that means?
It does, it says attached with a common, I think it says a common
Common
wall.
door, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right. So, common water and sewer.
We've had a lot of people ask about the breezeway question lately, and
Yeah.
so we've had to kind of really dive into what, it has to be attached by living space, which would be heated.
Okay, so it's not, this is not an ADU.
It is not an ADU. It is a variance for a second dwelling unit.
And would you agree that there's no way to attach it without needing a setback variance? If you don't know, you don't know, I'm just,
I don't know.
Okay.
I wouldn't make that conclusion.
okay.
But it's close,
Close.
the 50 feet.
The 50 feet from the bluff is close, right. There would be limited attachment points available in still maintaining all of the setbacks.
We don't have a floor plan of the existing,
I might have a floor plan, actually.
The only thing we heard was that he could only do it on the northeast corner, as opposed to the north side. Didn't we have a case a couple of months ago of a separate unit?
yeah,
Up
it's
on a hill, yeah,
Yep.
right, we did,
Did we grant that?
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, there was one you did not.
But I think it was because of the slope of the property.
Yeah.
No, I just have the basement, sorry.
Any further thoughts, Jim? Laura?
I think I'm inclined to grant it. I think given that there is no, based on the representations that have been made, no realistic place to attach it, and given that an ADU is a reasonable use, and it in and of itself will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or create a health, safety, or welfare issue, I don't think there's a harm to the public. It's not outweighed by a gain to the applicant, and I don't think it's gonna diminish surrounding property values, so I don't love it, but I'm inclined to grant it. I think it meets the criteria.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I would have, if we're going to approve it, I would suggest conditions of approval that it be required to comply with all ADU regulations, including it can never be sold separately or condominiumized.
Actually, I'm comfortable with all that, particularly with those two conditions on it, even though it's a separate dwelling unit. If we restrict it from not being condoed or sold separately, it makes it more part of the existing home.
Motion?
I'll move to approve it for the reasons I just stated, with the conditions I just stated.
And I'll second.
Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition, say nay.
Nay.
Motion carries 3-1. Mr. Carley, the chair is yours. There he is.
Thanks, Nick.
You should bang the gavel after each case.
Yeah, man. Maybe get one of those caps we used to have when we were kids with the pistols. Smack it with a hammer. Next case this evening is case 0028-2023, 135 North State Street, RN Neighborhood Residential District. 135 NSS LLC is the owner. The owner wishes to seek a variance to establish three principal uses under Article 2824J, Table of Principal Uses, in addition to the existing general business use to include three-room rooming house, commercial indoor recreation and conference, trade or convention center, all of which are not permitted in the district. Wishes to seek a variance from the 113 parking spaces required by the above uses in Article 2872E, Table of Off-Street Parking, to allow the providing of 38 spaces. 26 parking spaces are projected to be off-site located at 125 North State Street and shared with those uses subject to a planning board conditional use approval of an alternative parking arrangement under Section 28711C. Also to seek a variance from Article 28711C, shared parking arrangements to allow for a maximum 606.1 feet between the principal use and off-site parking in connection with a shared parking arrangement with nearby 125 North Main Street. Thank you. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. This may be an all-time record for the number of times we've visited to discuss this particular piece of property.
Everyone else is gone in 15 minutes. Are you going to be able to do that?
I'll do my best. I
Right.
submitted a very long application, so hopefully you've all read it.
We've read it.
We've read it.
We've all read it, and I think most of us anyway are pretty familiar with the property
I agree.
and the history. Would you please identify yourselves for the record as you testify?
Yes, my name is Kelly Ovid-Puck. I'm with the law firm of Solow and Hollis. I'm legal counsel to the applicant.
And Matt Miller, I work for, with the owner, and I manage the property.
Unfortunately, Mr. Potter, who is the principal of the owner and who you've seen many times, was unable to join us tonight. He's celebrating he and his wife's 75th birthdays, which has been planned for some time, so his apologies that he wasn't able to join.
I can't imagine that he would have missed this for that.
It was close.
Could I get your last name again, please, sir?
Yes, Miller.
Did you bring a card, Matt? Okay. If you need any information about Matt, just, I think you have it, though.
Ms. Ovid-Puck, the floor is yours.
Okay, so we have a PowerPoint here that I'm going to be trying to breeze us through. I have been before this board a number of times on this property. I think most of the board is very familiar with the history of this property. So we're going to try and breeze through this very quickly. So this is 135 North State Street, which is at the corner of North Street and Church Street. The former Governor Rollins Manse, also the former rectory to the church that was next door and was demolished. Go ahead, Matt. Are you clicking me? Not responsible for technical difficulties.
No, I'm responsible for technical.
So you all have handouts. The next slide is simply an aerial of the property. This was taken from the city's GIS, and it shows the location of the property as well as the nearby property also owned by Mr. Potter at 125 North State Street, where the proposed shared parking lot is located. This actually shows how there's a number of different zoning districts that this is at the corner of. So the property at issue is in the neighborhood residential, but you'll also see here we have another residential district, industrial district, commercial district. There's also historic property district nearby. So we have a number of districts coming together here, and a very mixed neighborhood of commercial, residential. There was the former school that's now Binney and Media, as well as a number of historic properties in the area, including this one, which is on the National Registry of Historic properties. Next slide shows pre-construction. You see there the church, the adjacent auditorium, which has now been demolished and is replaced by the 8-unit pocket neighborhood. The two buildings that are on 135 North State Street have the same footprint, the Rollins Manse and then the carriage house behind it. The next slide, I think the next slide, oh, I missed this. Oh, you know what, it might be further down. I might have reordered my slides. So here's our very convoluted chronology, which I attempted to simplify, and you've all seen many times with the relief that's been granted previously. I'm not going to read through it. We can just kind of, because I think you are all familiar and you all know that after construction, Mr. Potter proceeded to use the property as he believed he was permitted to use. The code enforcement officer determined that that use was not permitted under the prior relief, and in particular, that both the residential units and the recreation and meeting spaces in the carriage house could not be used by third parties outside. It couldn't be rented or used by anyone other than the occupants at 125 and 135. We appealed that determination, we lost, and hence we're now here asking for the relief so that he can proceed with those uses. Next slide. You can go through this. Oh, here's my slide that shows the aerial of the current configuration, which is that shows the eight pocket neighborhood units instead of the church. And so one of the things that's of note is that where previously there were parking lots behind the church that connected to the parking lot on 125 and the parking lot at 135 that were used by guests and visitors to the church and the man's property, now the pocket neighborhood is between them, so they're no longer connected. But both parking lot on 135 and 125 continue to exist. And as I mentioned previously, those properties are both owned by Mr. Potter indirectly through entities that he owns. So next picture shows just our pre-renovation and post-renovation. While outside it is really beautiful, it's a beautiful property, a lot of the renovations that happened and that were expensive and extensive were interior renovations, including installing a lift and making the property generally accessible, I misspoke. And in keeping with the historic standards that are required for a building that has historic qualification. So you'll see I have here a front shot of the building, that's the manse that faces North State Street, as well as the side shot of the manse and then the carriage house behind it. That's looking from Church Street. So the Rollins manse, you can just go to the next slide, Matt. So, while this is little here, you all have it in front of you. You also all have it in your packet. The first floor of the manse is a kitchen area in the back, and I have a picture there kind of pointing to that area. And then some general office and meeting space. There's a very large reception area. This is a very large building, and it has very large spaces. Large conference rooms, large offices, large staircases. Everything here is really immense scale-wise. And so even though the square footage is a lot, the uses are relatively limited because of the way the space is structured. So you'll see here really the space that's kind of office space, which has been a permitted use, as disclosed in my application, the entire second floor is leased out to the Business Finance Authority, which has the use of these spaces. There's essentially a conference room space and then a dining room space that can also be used as a conference room. And those spaces in collaboration with the zoning administrator, Dr. Hutton, have been designated and classified as office spaces, while the kitchen space, which largely serves the residents, the residential users, has been classified as residential. Going on to the second and third floor on the next, I didn't have nice pictures for these ones, but the second floor is all entirely leased out to Business Finance Authority under a 10-year lease. The third floor is entirely residential. There's 2 units there, plus some common living area. And then in the basement, there's a third residential unit. And currently, 2 of those residential units are used by Legacy Wise Fellows, which was the original plan all along. Because one of the spaces was unoccupied, Fred leased it out to an outside tenant. And one of the requests is that we be permitted to lease all of those spaces, if necessary, to outside tenants. Moving on to the carriage house. Good, thanks, Matt. Keep it up. So you can go ahead. So the carriage house has 2 stories, and it was the original carriage house. The first time I saw it, it still had the wheel for the horses to go through. And it has been completely renovated. There were severe structural issues, and Fred, Mr. Potter, considered tearing it down. No one was including the city, was in favor of that because it is a beautiful historic structure. So instead he renovated it. And he was able to do that by putting in some kitchen space in the bottom. There is, again, a large entryway, reception area. There's 2 bathrooms on the first floor, handicapped accessible. But large kitchen area and kind of an open space there. You can see the picture. And then there's a community meeting room in the back there, which is used, he does trainings there, but is also the space that would be used for the small-scale functions that he's proposing, and was used last summer until we received the determination from the code enforcement officer that we couldn't do that. Also on the second floor, moving up to the second floor, where are we? Sorry, I'm switching back and forth with reading glasses and not. So on the second floor is where we have our recreational spaces, which were originally proposed as yoga spaces and now have been converted to a racing simulator, which we had lots of discussion about previously, and a golf simulator. So here are some pictures of the golf simulator spaces, and then the next slide actually has the pictures of the racing simulator area. So, and you can see here this equipment is very large. It takes up a lot of the space. I've noted on the prior slide that it's actually 35% of the floor space is taken up by the equipment itself. These are not spaces where we're going to have large, it's not safe to have large numbers of people. Go ahead, Matt. So last June and July, we conducted parking counts. This was when Fred was still operating the way he thought he was able to operate, and he was renting those spaces out. I know those are really tiny. I think you could probably read the ones in front of you better. But the important point here is we did parking counts, daily parking counts at 125, 135 on street, which include both the side streets. We didn't do parking counts on North State. Is that correct, Matt? And the maximum at 125 was 18 parking spaces utilized on 2 days, 1 day in the morning and 1 day in the afternoon. The maximum at 135 was 6 spaces, and you'll see there that was really only 3 days. And then the maximum on the street was 4 spaces used on both streets, and that was 1 afternoon between those 2 months. And then the max total between all of that was 23, and that was on 1 day, one morning. Next slide. So our required parking for the proposed uses is calculated to be 113 spaces, and here's the breakdown. The exact calculation is in the application materials. I've tried to keep this PowerPoint kind of high level. So you'll see there that obviously the vast majority of the spaces are coming from the classification as conference and recreation, the proposed uses, and the carriage house. And then here we've done an analysis and a comparison of the spaces required under the zoning ordinance, the maximum spaces actually used based on our parking counts, the maximum spaces that we will believe we could, as a practical matter, will ever need, both for business hours and non-business hours. And there's a distinction there because we are proposing that the space, the recreation, and the community meeting space, to the extent we're renting it out to third parties, be non-business hours only in order to accommodate the fact that we do have limited parking. So, and you can see here that based on that, the functional analysis shows that, yes, we would have to use some of the parking spaces that are on North State, Church Street, and Franklin, but that there's plenty of parking available for what is actually needed. See, we're almost to the end. One of the requests for relief is that we will, if we use 125 North State Street parking lot for shared parking for overflow during non-business hours, we need a conditional use permit from the planning board, and one of the criteria for that is that that parking be 500 feet or less from the use. You'll see here there's various ways that can be measured. We've been told we need to measure it from the parking, from the actual use to the parking lot, which results in 606 feet, so just 100 feet over what's required. So we're asking for some relief from that, which you see would require patrons to kind of go out to North State Street and then walk along the sidewalk there. Frankly, I think a longer walk is better for everyone, but that's my own personal opinion. And then my last page, I've just summarized the relief that we're asking for. So we're asking for a variance for the additional uses. We already have a variance for the office use, which also is not a permitted use. And we're asking that the additional uses be allowed, namely residential, that the 3 residential units which were classified by the zoning administrator as rooming house be permitted, that we be allowed to engage in private fitness and recreation. The golf and racing simulator rooms have been classified as commercial, indoor recreational, and then private events and meetings. And you'll see in our proposed use description, that's up to 50 meetings of up to 50 people. So these are smaller gatherings. We're not talking about, 200, 300 people like you might have at the Grapponi Conference Center or Holiday Inn. These are much smaller meetings, piano recitals, small birthday parties, things like that. And that has been classified as conference, trade, or convention center. All of those classifications are driving the parking requirements, which we believe are excessive for what is actually needed of 113. So we need to ask for a variance from that parking required to 38 spaces, which is the 12 on-site spaces. We also have 2 spaces that we haven't constructed by CUP, so additionally we could add 2 more if we had to. And then 26 spaces for the shared parking on 125, which would be only used as overflow on non-business hours. So the last requested relief is again for that shared parking proximity requirement to allow us to have a proximity of 606.1 feet as opposed to 500.
Would you take us back briefly to the parking analysis?
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure I understand this. I'm looking at the table that you had in your slide.
Yes.
Spaces required, I assume, is what the ordinance requires.
Yes, given the classifications.
Okay, and maximum spaces used, that's your observation in practice?
Yes.
What you actually needed or did use?
What was actually counted there, yes.
Okay. Now, explain to me about maximum spaces needed business hours and non-business hours.
So, for 125 North State Street, we just assumed that the maximum spaces needed were the spaces that were there during business hours. That property actually has a variance for the parking. So presumably the parking that's there is what's needed during business hours. That property is only used for office. There's only office tenants there. It's only used for office. There's no other use. The maximum spaces needed during non-business hours, likely there's probably not going to be any spaces needed. We only are proposing to enter into a lease of 26 of those spaces, so there are 3 spaces that will be left anyway. So that was 125. On 135, our detailed analysis is actually in the application of how many spaces, but we assume that the residential and office use spaces were pretty accurate of what we would need during business hours and non-business hours. We shouldn't need any office use spaces. So it's really the conference and recreation space that we feel significantly overestimates what is needed, given that the way the spaces are configured, our anticipated uses requiring over 90 spaces for those uses is simply excessive. It's not safe. It wouldn't be practical to have that many people. If you that's cars. So if you do 2 or 3 people in each car, that you're actually calculating out many more people in the space than would ever be fit in that space or as a practical or safe matter be used. The analysis, the actual analysis, so for example, for the racing simulators, we think those are actually more analogous to a bowling alley, which the zoning ordinance does say you only need 4 spaces for each lane. I think it was 4 spaces. I think it was 4 spaces. And I think that's because it's inherently not a spectator sport. If you look at public assembly and the definition of public assembly, it's a spectator requirement. It's large gatherings of people. Here, I think, and that's inherent in some of the recreational categories. So,
If I could just interrupt you for a moment. So when you say spaces needed, that's your calculation of what you might need,
what as a practical matter would be required, yes.
even though that exceeds your actual spaces used in some cases by quite a bit?
Yes, because there's going to be some fluctuation, and we recognize that.
Okay, so, I understand. So maximum spaces needed is your calculation of the maximum.
Of the maximum, and I don't even think that's what we would expect on a day-to-day, that this is kind of the outside estimate of the maximum that we think would be needed.
Okay.
And that's if all of those spaces were simultaneously used, so.
And when you say street,
We mean North State Street, Franklin, and Church Street.
and you're saying that you observed 4 cars parked on the
We
street?
did not do counts on North State Street, so the 4 maximum is on Franklin and Church Street.
Okay, so, and then you're saying there are 28 spaces total available on the street in your vicinity?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Can we stay in this park? When you're done, Chris, I had a parking question.
Go ahead.
So, help me out, so, using this, let's use an example of 50 people attending a conference.
Mm-hmm.
Where would they park?
So, I think it would be safe to assume we aren't likely to have events that have 50 individual people coming in 50 cars.
Because you said, that's, I think the number you used when you
Yep,
talked about it.
that's that's what we are comfortable with, that's what we've represented. The limit of these gatherings would be 50 people.
Okay.
So we have 12 spaces on our site, 26 spaces will be leased on the other site at 125, and then there will be some on-street parking required.
So the total spaces that you have available, including 28 in the street, is 69?
That's correct.
All right. Okay. Other questions from the board?
So the carriage house hosts the recreation space upstairs.
Correct.
And then what was advertised as the wedding space downstairs, right?
Correct. The
So,
community room.
yeah, okay, so I guess my question is, how loud is the recreation space? And what I'm really getting at is, what are the chances both spaces would be used simultaneously?
That's to you, Matt.
Yeah, so, noise level, if you, and I've done this myself, if you're in the community room downstairs, noise as far as the racing simulators, it's very, very small.
Okay.
We actually had one of our commercial tenants came in the building while the racing simulators were actually being used, and he told me when he came up, he didn't even know they were on.
Okay.
The only thing you can hear from time to time, just because of the construction of it, when somebody's playing golf and they actually hit a golf ball, you sometimes can hear it bounce.
Okay. So realistically, both spaces could be used at the same time?
They could be, however, I'm the one that does the scheduling
Yeah.
for events, and if we're able to. I do not, depends on the type of event that's happening. They typically will not be used at the same time. If it's
And I have a question that's probably more for you. Would you be willing to have that be a condition of approval, that they couldn't both be used at the same time? Because that would alleviate, I think, a lot of parking concerns.
I think we would agree to that as long as, so we do have community events, and
the
if they're
maze.
renting, they're allowed to use the amenities upstairs.
Oh, okay, yeah, but it would all be one group.
It would be all one group.
Okay.
Yes.
Right,
So
like a
I guess
birthday
that would be
party or
the,
something
yeah,
like that, yeah.
yeah, so, and we do, this is in the application, but there's no walk-in rental of this, like, you know, if you go to a bowling alley or something, you can walk in and just rent it then. This is all on a reservation-only basis, and it's all, everybody who rents it is vetted, their purpose, the hours, who they're having come is all vetted. So, it's highly controlled. Would you agree, Nat?
Yes, every rental goes through me.
And are you also, you've represented that the gatherings would be 50 people. Are you willing to agree to a condition of approval that they would be no more than 50 people?
Yes.
The 3 residential units, what are the sizes? I know it's in there, I just.
Do you want to, yeah, why don't you go ahead and answer that, Matt? I don't know
So,
off the top of my head.
2 of the 3 are just rooms
How
that
many square
have
feet?
300, 350.
Okay.
They're- they're
The
small.
upstairs ones with the common living space?
Yeah, no, that's 1 upstairs and 1 in the basement level. They're more just single rooms that have built-in bunk beds.
And they each have their own bathroom, correct?
And there's a bathroom attached, yes. Though there is 1 apartment up on the 3rd floor that has a living kitchenette, small dining area, 1 bedroom and a bathroom. That one is roughly 750 square feet.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions from the board?
Was there originally 4 residential units?
There was.
There were, the 4th residential unit is actually included in the lease to the Business Finance Authority, so it's not being used for residential purposes, and it's a 10-year lease, so we're not asking that that one be included at this time, because it's not necessary.
Because I remember a couple years
It
ago.
was, yeah, it was, because we originally thought that the Legacy Wise program would be ramped up more quickly, and there would be need for all 4 of those units for the Legacy Wise Fellows. Unfortunately, then there was COVID, and things slowed down, and construction costs more than anticipated, so we are now only using 3 of the units for residential
It could reemerge at
purposes.
some point as a 4th residential unit.
It could be, but we realized we would have to come back to this board and ask for additional relief in that event.
And are the residential units, would they be workforce housing? Do they fall in that definition?
They certainly could, given the size and the fact that they are not, they're not at, you know, high market rental. I mean, the 2 for Legacy Wise, I think, are included as part of their
Correct.
program, so, yeah, certainly.
Other questions?
Yeah, so the chronology of events,
Yes.
can any of this have, yeah, a minute ago, there was somebody here who said they were here with something 17 years ago. I don't think this one's quite that old, but,
It's not that old.
yeah, has the residential use been approved by the zoning board previously for this property?
So, the residential use was approved as something called live, work, under a prior code enforcement officer. And my understanding is that there is no longer an inclination to use that classification because it's not defined in the zoning ordinance. And so we need to instead find a classification in the zoning ordinance that fits this use.
Right, so as I recall, I think at the time the representation was, and the program's probably changed, that the people, there would be folks working in the building and living in, the same people living in the building.
And
That's no
2
longer
of the units are being used that way. But we would like, this has taught us that we need to probably have a little more flexibility going forward, so we'd like to be able to, if we need to, use all 3 units as rental to outside tenants.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition to it? Oh, all right. Come on up. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but. May we have your name, please?
My name is James Doherty. I live at 28 Church Street in Concord. So I've lived in my house for 22 years, and so I'll sort of give a quick rundown of the neighborhood itself. It's as Attorney Puckett pointed out, there's a sort of a mixed use of zones that are sort of all conglomerating in that same area. You know, when we first moved in, Walker School was there and functioning, St. Peter's was there and functioning, Bennett Funeral Home is down the street. So it's a pretty busy neighborhood. While it is very residential where we live and around the mansion and now the new Pocket neighborhood, there is still a fair amount of traffic and on-street parking throughout the days and weeks all the time. So as far as changes in the neighborhood, I speak in favor because Mr. Potter and Mr. Miller have been pretty upfront about what they were doing from the get-go and the work that they've done in the neighborhood to sort of upgrade things, the work they've done to preserve the manse and the carriage house is just, I mean, it's made a big difference in how the neighborhood was prior to, you know, all the changes that could have really transpired with the closing of the school and the closing of the church. So overall, the neighborhood is really, it's been upgraded by the work that they've done. So to sort of like put a hardship on them based on the parking, especially when their assumptions and what they provided to us for information as to what they were going to do with this property hasn't really changed. You know, it was going to be a combination of living and working space and what they were going to do with the carriage house. And in the last couple of years since they've started this, they've had some of that use has been done before they realized that it wasn't right meeting code. And it hasn't affected what goes on in our neighborhood as far as parking goes, compared to how it's been in the past 20 years. I'm speaking. I mean, I know what it was like when the church was functioning and when there's, you know, when there were wakes quite often. I mean, all of that has changed obviously a little bit as we've moved forward, but I mean, Bennett Funeral Home used to be, probably still is considered a thriving business, but it's not like it was. But, you know, there was wakes there a few nights a week, cars were parked kind of all over the place. Walker School was busy, the church was busy all the time. So we're very used to cars being parked on the street, and so I don't necessarily think that granting them this exception to use and assume that on-street parking can be used for this is really out of the ordinary. And overall, the atmosphere of the neighborhood is only been improved by the work that they've done, the work that was done to put the Pocket neighborhood in where the church is. And I just sort of think that, you know, given the way this has all been transpired, to see it sort of like curtailed by that as an issue really isn't sort of fair to them at this point, given what they've done. So like I said, I don't think it necessarily affects the way the neighborhood is. I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone for parking cars on the street. I have a family of 5 with 3 licensed drivers beyond my wife and I. So we're, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on. And I understand that there's children in the neighborhood that, you know, people are probably concerned about the traffic, but I don't necessarily think that the traffic in our neighborhood is affected by what is going on in this particular establishment or, you know, things like that. It's just busy in general. I don't think that, you know, what they're doing there and the events, if we're using that term, that they're using is going to really affect that. From what I've seen from the time that they started, it's unnoticeable.
I think we've got your drift.
All right.
Are there any questions from the board?
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
Yes.
May we have your name, please?
My name is Tori Hirsch.
Tori Hirsch?
Tori with a T. Yes. So how I'm involved in this, I was a former Legacy-Wise Fellow, so I worked with Fred Potter, and I still do. I am now an associate attorney at his law firm, Just Law NH, and I'm state director for Legacy-Wise. So from the months of August 2022 to November 2022, I was a resident at 135 North State Street in one of the upstairs live-in units. And there was never a time when I would, you know, walk outside in the morning to walk down the block to 125 North State Street to go to work. There was never a time when I thought, oh my goodness, there's so many cars in this parking lot, or any sort of really indication that there needed to be extra parking. I just thought that's how it always was. There's a few cars parked there from the BFA. But even after hours, even when the carriage house was being rented, there was never a time I, wasn't able to park my car in the lot that was there. And then in addition, with the carriage house itself, very lightly used from the months that I lived there and still continuing on. Like Matt said earlier, every rental has to go through him personally. He screens the people. He asks them what their purposes are for using it. And yeah, from the time I've been here since August, still working through now for Legacy Wise, there's never been, an excessive amount of people wanting to use the spaces. I think they're great spaces and I've enjoyed using them myself, but it's always been light use. So yeah, those are just my thoughts and observations.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who would like to be heard in opposition to it?
You did have an email in front of you this evening that I received.
Yeah, that's on the opposition side.
Yes, it is.
Yep. Please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
I do.
Please identify yourself for the record.
For the record, Chris Bolt of Donahue Tucker Chandela here on behalf of the Rollins Court owners as abutters. And I do have packets, and Kelly, I have one for you. Sorry I didn't bring it on a PowerPoint.
That's okay.
In short, Mr. Chairman, like you, we're slightly amazed that we're back here. The application that is in front of you for these variances, I could speak a very long time on for all of the flaws in it, but I won't. I'm going to hit three specific areas in the application that was not a part discussed by Attorney Abbott, was the historic or the holdover use. That's simply not true, and we're going to go through why. The parking that you've already started to flag is completely inadequate, and they cannot meet the 5 variance criteria for any of the 3 variances, and we'll give you the reasons why there. On the holdover historic use, I did see that Kelly had an aerial for you that's pre-construction. My Exhibit A, albeit it's a little dark and pixelated, but it is from Google before the destruction of the demolition of the church. The large parish hall is at the rear of the property, rear of the church. That is where receptions and events were held. The manse was the priest's house. You don't hold a reception in the priest's house. Those of you who may have been familiar with the property may know that. The carriage house was a garage and storage units. You don't hold and did not hold events or receptions in the barn for this old house. We have, as Exhibit B, an email that was in your packet, I believe, but I wanted to make sure you had it available, from long-term parishioner Jim Kalinsky, 30-year parishioner, saying, in essence, that same thing. We didn't hold events over there. That was the priest's house. There might have been small meetings of the parish, a committee coming in to meet in the priest's office, but it's not rented out to third parties. They're not holding wedding receptions. They're not holding birthday parties. They're not holding anything in these 2 buildings. Because that church was torn down, and because the original developer, Mr. Chorlian, made changes in his application, the original carriage house plan was to be the community room for my clients, Rollins Court, before it was built. There was a change to change the subdivision line so that the carriage house stayed with the manse. There was never an approval for this carriage house to be an open to the public community room. That has never been part of your prior decisions. The application uses functional equivalence as its phrase on why it's functionally equivalent to allow this to be there. Again, this part of the property, when it was a church, was never used this way. And my clients will object to it being allowed to be used that way for open to the public community events. Turning to the wholly inadequate parking. The issue is, for the uses they are seeking, they are supposed to, by your Article 27.7, have their parking on their property for their uses. You can, with conditional use permit, get permission to have it off-site when they're tied and when they're close. This property is not tied and is not close. I would note that the maximum distance of the 606.1 feet gets you to the end of the parking lot, not to the spaces. You want to get to the spaces, you're going to go 50 or 80 feet more. When you have that many parking spaces not present, you're supposed to have 113. They are saying they have 38 only if you count 125 North State Street. One of the things that was never mentioned by Kelly is they got a variance to build a very large structure also on 125 North State Street. And that included a variance for parking for that project because they didn't have enough for that project. You, in essence, are double counting already too few parking spaces. The 26 was viewed in the record as the 26 that were needed for the new structure based on the employees that were going to be there. That was Mr. Potter's statement. To now have it be double counted, my request for you is simply deny that. It's too far, it's too few, it's too much for all of these uses to have that spread of parking spaces. I also don't know if in your regulations, and if I've missed it, I apologize, where you're allowing off-street parking to count, because that to me violates the opening provision of Chapter 27.7.
You mean on-street parking?
Off-street, or on-street parking, yes, my apologies. The parking to fit the number of parking spaces that they should have requires almost 0.44 acres of land, almost what they have on that 0.51 acres of land with the buildings. They simply are trying to put too much into too small a space. When you have, and that by the way is without any aisles, that's just your 9 by 19 times 113 to get 19,323 square feet. An acre is 43,560. They are just about at, a half an acre needing for all of the parking for the uses that they're wanting to have. It is, the parking arrangements, we believe, mean that you cannot meet the variance criteria. By the way, on Exhibit C, that is a photo from the January storm. They don't have adequate snow storage for what they have now. They're putting the snow in a handicap zone. In your regulations, don't allow that. Going through the criteria, as you well know, the public interest and spirit of the ordinance prongs are viewed together, and that test is granting the variance must not unduly and in a marked degree conflict with the stated provisions of the zoning ordinance. They have approximately 10% of the parking that they need. Oh, and I failed to say, 2 of the 12 parking spaces on the Mance carriage house lot are already committed to my clients on after hours by easement. So they have 10, not 12 on their property. When you have that few, it is, I think, a textbook definition of unduly and in a marked degree conflicting. You're not asking, one of the gentlemen was here earlier, there was 5 or 10% off of what he needed to have. And you quickly realized, that is not that big of a change. We've got the opposite here. They only have 5 or 10% of what they need. They're missing 90 to 95% of what they need. That is unduly and in a marked degree conflicting. They can't meet those first 2. The third prong is substantial justice. Here, I ask you to remember, and that many of you have been around for a long time, you remember BOSHA, when there was a different standard for a use variance and an area variance, and economics was part of the mix. That was removed by the legislature in effective January 1st of 2010, about a decade before Mr. Potter bought this property. For him to claim economics is irrelevant for you. It is no longer part of the criteria that he's allowed to argue about. Substantial justice is that balancing test you're supposed to view on where is harm to the applicant versus benefit to the public as a result of the loss. Here, yes, there is a loss to Mr. Potter, but that is the free market at play. You put in things before you have all approvals necessary. The fact that they're claiming that there was prior statement from code enforcement officer is frankly irrelevant under 2 cases. One, the Dembiek v. Hooksett case that I cited to you when they were back here for an appeal of administrative decision, that basically says equitable estoppel you don't deal with. That's a court case. The other one is Thomas v. Hooksett, which was back in 2006. That one said, you don't get to rely, applicant, you don't get to rely on a statement made by a town staffer or even a planning board chair when it's flat against what the zoning ordinance says. You don't get to have that be a reasonable reliance. And that's what they're trying to use to get you to say yes to this yet additional creeping out changes to this property. When it was originally proposed by Mr. Chorlian, there's a statement in the minutes. He says there are not going to be any conference rooms or events, period. We ask you to stay with that. If they're wanting the 3 units for their interns, let them have the 3 units for their interns. That's what was previously approved. To go off to off-site or unrelated rentals, that changes the mix because there's no control on Mr. Potter's part of, a relationship. You're going just 3 market rents, and is it going to be, where are the kids going to play? There's no yard. There's no space. When you have the issues in play here, it would be an injustice to my clients to grant these variances. They have a residential neighborhood that they bought into. They knew that these 2 buildings were allowed for X or Y uses, but now we're going A, B, C, D, and F to add to it. Is in no way, shape, or form supposed to be a convention center or allowing events to come in. The statements of Mr. Chorlian, again, were The uses in the carriage house were ancillary to the manse. It means those businesses that were there and renting could use the facilities in
I think
the-
we've covered that item 2 or 3 times. Thanks.
I'm not sure I had said his statement on that one, Mr. Chairman, but I wanted to make sure. We have diminution in value as a result of Ms. Huita's letter of February 26th. That's Exhibit D. She's a 50-year realtor here in Concord. In her opinion, allowing these uses would definitely diminish my client's property value. It is something that common sense says that she's right. We understand that there is in the application or in a prior application, maybe it was a realtor's opinion that there was not going to be diminution, but that realtor is a tenant in 125 tied with Mr. Potter. We respectfully ask that you give the weight and credence to Ms. Huita's letter. Finally, on unnecessary hardship, I respectfully urge that there is no unnecessary hardship. There may be hardship, but it's necessary hardship to come in and say this variance is so far off what is required. It is, I liken it to, I'm here going up against Goliath. I've got 5 small stones to try to convince you that the variance criteria has not been met, which is their burden. I only have to have one of my stones land to say that you can't get the variance. I believe all 5 are missing, but I respectfully urge you to consider this record and to deny these variances. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
When the operation was functioning, during the time when Mr. Potter said he believed he was complying with the ordinance, having a public facility here, were there problems for your clients, and what were they, if there were?
I'm not sure that when things were done, on what dates. So it is one where my clients have the easement through that area to reach their garages. They are all here. Maybe somebody can speak to that, but I didn't ask that question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you much for your time.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to offer in opposition to this appeal? Please come forward. Bear in mind that Attorney Bolt has given us a very thorough and detailed presentation, and so we do trust that you're not going to cover the same ground. Very good. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
May we have your names, please?
Natalie Harrington and Lindsay Harrington, 19 Church Street.
What would you like us to know?
We purchased our house about 3 years ago. Since then, we've welcomed a son. There's lots of kids in the neighborhood now, so that's an exciting change for us. We also have great neighbors, like Mr. Doherty. First and foremost, we're concerned about safety. There's a potential for increased traffic, and it's incredibly narrow. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the street, though.
You mean Church Street?
Church Street, yes. But generally, it's residential, but it is quite narrow in terms of parking. We are also concerned about the impact this would have on the availability of on-street parking on Church Street. If 5 spots are used, that's roughly 25 to 30% of the available spots on that street in our 1-block radius. Nights and weekends are prime time both for events, but also for us as residents to have guests. So obviously, we'd kind of be competing for the same space.
And then I don't know if this would be accurate, but if he ever sells the property, if the variance for the conference space would stay, and if it's used for something other than like the golf simulator or something, would it generate more people, making more parking necessary than what's being asked for now?
The answer to your question is yes. the first question, the variance goes with the property, not with the owner.
Okay.
The answer to the second question is, I don't think any of us knows.
Okay, yeah, so our concern would be if he ever sells, that increased parking would be necessary and they wouldn't have the spots on site. That's it for us.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your brevity. Is there anyone else? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
I do. Nicholas Holmes, 131 North State Street. Unit 7.
Holmes, was it?
Holmes, Holmes. And I will be brief. 2 points. I actually just said, I like Matt Miller. I respect Matt Miller. He can police it. But this variance would run with the land. And don't know who the next owner will be. I don't know if they will police it. That is one of our concerns. The second point I wanted to make is I wanted to respond to your question about whether there have been problems. I would remind the board that we had a pandemic. Things were quiet. This place was not operating for a long period of time because of the pandemic. This came to a head just as we were coming out of the pandemic. We don't know what this will be like when it is under full operation, when there are the 50-person events, when there are the events that use both the downstairs and the upstairs. We are concerned about it. Even though there have not been many events, there have been problems. One of the primary ways that we can access our property is through an easement that runs between the carriage house and the mansion. Just 2 weeks ago, when my wife was coming home, that's the way that she usually comes home, she couldn't get through because there were cars parked in that easement. It was a very narrow passageway, so she had to go around and come in the other driveway. That's one example. There have been other...
Do you reside in the Pocket community?
I do. I reside in unit number 7, which is behind the carriage house. It's maybe 50 or 60 feet from us. The noise is at times audible, but we are not here because we're trying to cure a past problem. We are here because we think that this proposed use, if it is fully used, will create or could create problems in the future. Thank you.
Questions from the board? Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Comments from code enforcement?
Just a few, and I'll try to be brief. With the on-street parking use, that's something that the code division does take exception to, because as it was stated, there's a lot of users of that on-street parking, not just this use. So we're using that in the functional analysis we feel is flawed. The other thing is, as a visitor to the site, when I was on site for a meeting, they don't actually park in the way that their site plan says they're going to park. So I could barely get on site, never mind everybody else who needs to be on site. So I think that in terms of what's going to happen in the future, if we look at what's happened in the past, there have been compliance issues. And whether or not some of the conditions that were discussed are enforceable also brings concern to our office. Because some of the, how many people can be in the building, and some of those issues are very hard for us to enforce. And so those are just a couple of issues that we want to bring to your attention.
Very good, thank you. We do have, did you have a question?
I had a question.
Yeah.
Please.
So, I asked questions about the size of the residential things.
Mhm.
Somewhere in here, was it a distinction drawn and would describe the smaller ones? It's more of a boarding house?
It is a boarding house because they have a shared kitchen.
Okay. And is the shared kitchen in the conference, I could have asked the applicant.
It's the same kitchen that's used for the other parts of the building. But there's a, and Matt, you can help me if there's a part of the kitchen that's only for the renters, and then a part of the kitchen that's used for the conference facility.
Okay. And you get to enforce that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Where did you make that sandwich? We do have a letter here, an email from Jim Kalinsky. He doesn't indicate what his address is, but he is addressing the board to say that they were parishioners at the church. He and his wife were parishioners at the church for many years, and that he feels that the use that's being proposed here under the request for a variance is not consistent with the historic use of the property, which is consistent with what Attorney Bolt said. He says the rectory was used for small meetings and so on. The carriage house was used for storage. So that's information that we have already heard in testimony, and the letter will be on file on the record. Ms. Ovid-Puck, would you like to offer any factual clarification in response to what you've heard?
Yes, please.
Please come forward.
So I will try and be brief. Mr. Miller is going to respond factually on some of the things that he has more information about, but the points that I wanted to respond to, we aren't arguing here that we should be allowed to continue this use because of the historic use. We already made that argument and we lost, so that's not our argument today. The office addition that's proposed for 125 North State Street is only offices. The variance that was granted for the parking there took that into account, and those office uses will not be simultaneous with the uses that we're proposing share the parking, which will be outside of office hours, so it doesn't actually affect it. The on-street parking, we're not asking this board to count the on-street parking when we ask that it allow us to have 38 spaces. We're asking it to take into consideration the fact that there is available on-street parking. As far as the valuation of the property, we have a letter from Barbara Rudig, who, yes, is renting space from Mr. Potter. Barbara Rudig is a local realtor, you probably already all know that, which supports the increase in valuation that's been brought about by this property, and that there won't be any detriment to the value of the property in the area. You can make your own determination as to whether Ms. Rudig is credible or not, just because she happens to be a tenant of that property. I also did a quick search to see if any of those Rollins Court units had sold since they were originally purchased. There's only 8 of them, and it wasn't that long ago that they were created and originally purchased. The only one that sold actually happens to be the unit that was owned by Mr. Potter and his wife, who they did sell it to an unrelated third party, and I know that because I represented Mr. Potter in the sale, and it sold for significantly more than Mr. Potter had bought it for, not much in 2020. And I'll just, that's publicly available information. I only have one printout, but Mr. Potter bought the property for $470. I think that was the sales price for all the units. And he sold it in November 2022 for $626,000. So it doesn't seem like the uses that he's made of his property at 135 North State Street have had a detrimental impact on the value of the adjacent properties. And I think Mr. Miller might have some comments to make.
So also too, I don't know if you had gotten them, but I have them. I just want to make sure you do have them. I have some other letters of support from surrounding neighbors. I just want to make sure.
I don't believe I've seen any.
Okay, so can I pass them?
Is this a single copy of those, or is these?
No, there's multiple
It's like,
copies.
there's like 4 or 5, and it's.
I meant like copies for each
There's
board
more,
member?
yes.
Yes,
Oh,
there
okay.
is, but
Yes.
it's like,
They're not separated anymore because we pulled out the broker
like that
letters.
is one packet for you.
Okay.
So they're, I put them in order, but they're there. But just really briefly, as far as the kitchen facilities, there is a main kitchen. You saw the picture. What was not on the picture is there's actually what we used to call a butler's pantry. It's a prep area that is a separate room from the kitchen. It has a door that goes into the main kitchen. The prep area is what we have allowed the commercial tenants to use. They just requested a microwave, so they have a microwave and a toaster oven there, but separate from that, the main kitchen is the residences only. So that just kind of clarifies that a little bit. And then as far as plowing, to my knowledge, we have our own plow truck for the properties that we manage. To my knowledge, we don't push snow into handicapped spaces. That would, obviously be sort of inappropriate. And recently we did actually remove snow from the area. We're prepared to do that. We understand eventually in a regular New Hampshire winter, we'll run out of space to put snow on the property, and we're prepared to remove snow, and we've already done that. this year and last year as well, so.
I'd just like to make one final point on the concern about the change of ownership. My understanding is that when you grant a variance, and this is because I've received orders from this board that say this, that the variance is subject to what was proposed in the application. So even if somebody else buys this property, they can't use it in a different way. Mr. Potter was bound by that, and which is why we're here. I think it would be unjust to say now he can't get relief because of that possibility.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Mr. Potter the variance that was previously granted was determined to not allow the uses that he was making because he was bound by the representations that he had made and bound by the interpretation. I think that that's the way a variance works, is that it's subject to those representations, it's subject to the uses that were proposed. Every time I've received an order granting a variance, it's very clear about that. So if you grant a variance in this instance, any future owner or future use is going to be subject to those same conditions.
Anything else you'd like us to know?
That's it. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. We do have some letters here. They are all in favor of the appeals. I won't read them all word for word. One is from Rich Tebow, who lives in Manchester and uses the golf simulator and is in favor of the appeal. It says the golf simulator does not accommodate a large number of people. There's another from Victoria Campbell, who lives at 17 Church Street, who indicates that there's never been any disturbance or problem caused for her due to the use of the building. This is from June Wilson, who does not indicate where she lives, but she does. Oh no, yes she does. She lives at 28 in a four-unit apartment in 2022 Church Street, and has not encountered any problems with the use of the Governor's Center in recent times. Kathleen Kesterer, who is has been a resident at the Governor's Center, 135 North State Street. At no time in her residence did she encounter any parking conflicts or congestions. And David and Sharon Pickney, who are at 26 Church Street, support the request. We also have a letter from, as they indicated, from Barbara Rudig, a realtor in Concord, who indicates that she believes that the improvements have increased the value of the property and that the proposed use will not decrease the value of surrounding properties. With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. I think with the permission of the board, we probably ought to consider these requests in pieces rather than all at a time. Does everybody agree with that?
Yep.
Okay. So what I'd suggest we do is start with the variance to establish three principal uses, table of principal uses, to include the three-room rooming house, commercial indoor recreation, and conference and trade or convention center, all of which are not permitted in the district. The second one is has to do with the number of parking spaces and their request for the alternative arrangement. And the third has to do with the shared parking. Let's talk about the use for this for a start. Mr. Monahan.
A quick question for Dr. Hutton. If we take no action than the previous action by the board to allow I'm going to use the term live work, even though it doesn't necessarily have a place. Would that just be allowed to continue?
So if you take no action, or if you, don't grant this
Fair enough,
relief,
yeah.
what was previously granted stands.
Okay.
So they'd still be able to use those units for the rental units for people who work in the offices that are there. It's the outside rental that,
Right, okay.
that wouldn't be allowed to continue.
Mr. Monahan, how do you look at the request for variances? And I think you can.
Yeah, I'll start with the use. I think that it just seems peculiar to me that that the space is being used for what they being proposed today. I appreciate that we've heard a lot about the investment that was made, but I think that considering the economics of it is not something that we should be looking at. So we'll I'm sure have a healthy conversation about it, but I just think it's just way outside of what the expectations were when the property was redeveloped, and also outside of the expectation of the abutters when they moved into whatever the pocket village is called, Rollins Park or whatever.
Right. Now, there are three different requests here, which they've chosen to group. How do you look at the question of the three-room rooming house, which is essentially to allow the so-called live workspace to remain and then to have one apartment?
As a general matter, we've been trying to do, in my position here, trying to be flexible to try to address housing needs. So of the three, I think there's potentially more flexibility there, though there is a housing opportunity that exists under current approvals by the board. The recreation use, I think, is pretty far outside of what you would expect in this part of the zoning of the area. I mean, it's or what was expected when it was developed, and then the conference facilities, I think, puts a lot of parking pressure and brings a lot more folks into the property than they could probably support.
So you would say it was inconsistent with the intent of the ordinance?
Yes.
Or at least the second two, if not the first?
Yes.
Ms. Spector-Morgan?
Are there multifamily dwellings in the neighborhood? Or is it generally single family? There's multifamily. Okay. Then for the use variances, I want to look at them separately as well. For the indoor recreation and the conference center, I think that those would not be consistent with the spirit of the ordinance or the public interest, because I think they do alter the essential character of the neighborhood. I recognize it's a multi-use neighborhood, but the uses are mostly business uses. They're not so much recreation and gathering uses. I think there's really nothing unique about the property that justifies the grant of the variance or that makes it uniquely burdened by the zoning ordinance with regard to those uses. I appreciate the work that's been done. It's a beautiful property. The spaces look amazing inside, but the mere fact that they were built thinking this was allowed or hoping this would be allowed isn't a basis for granting a variance. On diminution of value, I mean, we have conflicting evidence. It seems to me that having a public recreation and conference center right next door to a residential area does have the potential to diminish property values. And in the substantial justice balancing test, I think there is a greater benefit to the public of keeping these types of uses out of this area. For the rooming house, I don't think that alters the essential character of the neighborhood, so I think it would be in the public interest and consistent with the spirit of the ordinance. I don't think that alone would diminish surrounding property values or benefit the public. We do come down to the hardship, though, and again, while it's a large property that has these residential spaces, those residential spaces were built under one variance, and I think if we were looking at this anew, they didn't exist, we wouldn't allow a rooming house to be built there. So for me, I would move to deny all three of the use variances.
Mr. Evans?
No comments.
Okay. Mr. Walner?
I guess I would tend to support the rooming or boarding house part of it. They did reduce requests for the usage from 4 to 3, but I too, like Laura and Jim, have issues with the other 2 usages.
I have a question for Dr. Hutton. There was a mention of a 4th living unit.
It's the one that's now rented to the office space.
Oh, so that's the one that was withdrawn.
The 4 and the 3 go back and forth. It's very confusing sometimes.
Oh, well, it obviously confused me, which is
Confuses me too.
of no particular merit. But in any case, what I'm hearing then is that the apartment unit that we were concerned about before as an apartment, not a live workspace, is no longer in the discussion.
There's one full apartment and 2 rooms currently.
Okay.
And one of the rooms is being rented to a third party.
Correct.
Okay, so, but I heard a common kitchen, so
Right, the rooms share a common kitchen. That's why they're.
the 2 rooms do.
The 2 rooms do.
Okay. So the one full apartment, how does that figure into this mix?
It has the same parking requirements as the rooms, so it doesn't alter the amount of parking. It just alters the character of those 2 rooms. They're not individual dwelling units, they're rooming house rooms.
Right. But would the apartment, in other words, are they missing a request here?
No.
Okay. I guess as I look at it, I think that the residential uses you can make a good case for the, well, let me back up and address hardship. Even though it's the last on the list, it's always the first in my mind. This is a very peculiar piece of property with a peculiar history, which works both for and against, in my opinion, the appellant's case. It works for it in that you could certainly argue that its configuration and the presence of the 2 old buildings create a unique lot that predates the zoning, certainly. On the other hand, this has been vetted several times through the process of zoning approval, and as Mr. Monahan pointed out, and I guess others have said, that the board already made certain decisions about what was permissible based on the representations of the owner. And I suspect that although there may have been a misunderstanding or just plain an error in the code enforcement office about what was allowable and what wasn't, we've already disposed of that question in our earlier discussions about overturning the code enforcement officer. So I don't see that as an argument, a situation that creates a hardship. But I would be inclined, I think, to say that to insist that the spaces that are currently used for residential be used for something else would be an unnecessary hardship on the owner.
They could continue to be used for residential, just only by people who work there, right?
Right.
Okay.
But I personally don't see the point in that stipulation in terms of all the other criteria that a variance require. To get to the conference room or the conference and a convention center, conference and convention center may be an unfortunate term here. It evokes notions of the Javits Center and people letting balloons go to the roof, when in fact it's a rather small meeting room. However, one of the things that these kinds of facilities do is they gather a lot of people in one place at one time, or at least more than you would normally expect in a residential neighborhood. And it definitely was not what was originally improved. We've already discussed that. So I'm afraid that the conference and the recreation Recreation I have a little less problem with because it's a very sparse use of the second floor of the building and probably doesn't have much of an impact, but I think the two are of a piece in this case. And, I don't see that the hardship of the site relates to the denial of those uses, whereas I do see it more connected with the old house being used for residential uses. This is a use among other uses that these buildings could be put to and actually have been proposed to be put to. So I don't see the hardship, and therefore the other criteria for a variance really are moot, since you have to satisfy all five in my mind. So that's the way I look at that one. Would it be the board's pleasure to treat number 1 as a separate item and to
Yeah, let's do two motions.
and
One
do
on-
and do
one on-
two motions on
One
it?
on the rooming and one on the indoor and.
All right.
What did
Is there anyone who would care to make a motion on the subject of the residential use?
I'm going to make a motion to deny it, so.
Okay. Is there a second? Sounds like the motion
Well,
fails for lack
let's
of a
just-
second.
Well, there was a reason we approved the previous use. It was questionable at the time, however many years ago, whether or not it was appropriate to have residential units in this space. And we approved it on the condition that it was this unique circumstance where the people were going to live and work there at the same time. So I guess I'm struggling a little bit to understand what changed.
Finances.
Correct, yeah, so, but, so I'm reluctant to, my,
Oh, I understand.
as I said, our flexibility to see what we can do to try to create additional housing opportunities in the city is important, so.
So, hearing no second, the motion fails for lack of a second. Is there an alternative motion? Thunderous silence here.
We can't take no action. We have to make a decision.
Yeah. So guys, gals, friends and neighbors,
In order to move things along, I will make a motion to approve, within the use variance, the residential units as has been represented to us this evening.
Okay, the rooming house.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? So the motion in favor of this represents a finding that there is a hardship created by the peculiar nature of the property, correct?
Yeah, before I have a question for Dr. Hutton. What happened, what's the status, if we were to adopt this evening, what is the status of the previous variance that allowed for this live-work
This
situation?
supersedes the
Yeah.
previous variance.
It does, so it eliminates that?
Yeah.
Replaces it? Okay. All right, I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead. You were asking me something?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we get all the slots filled on our dance card here about
Yeah.
the reasons why we're doing things. So is it consistent with the intent of your motion and of the second that we are finding that the hardship created by the peculiar nature of the property justifies a variance in this case, and that it's consistent with the character of the neighborhood, and that it's substantially just and so on?
You have to make those findings to grant it, Jim.
Yeah, I know, I'm just trying to, we're reaching around to find the hardship, and I don't know that it's the unique nature of in part, it's the unique nature of the property, in part it is, as you observed in your comments, that it's currently being used that way.
Well, yeah, and I'm also thinking about the fact that when we looked at it before, it was people living there. What else they were doing when they were there doesn't strike me as being all that significant in terms of its impact on the world.
Well, it did then, but it doesn't now.
It didn't then. It's just that's what they were proposing. But that's irrelevant.
Well, then it did to me, but we're changing it.
Yeah,
so.
no, well, if it did to you, then Do you want to withdraw your motion?
No, I'll continue to move forward. And I
Good,
think
please
you,
do.
Yes. You don't want to recess and invite them all back?
No, thanks. No, that's,
Um,
I just assumed we
Yeah, I
stood
think
up,
there
did
is-
our job here.
There's a uniqueness to the property in that it's historic nature, and the preserving that historic nature brings with it certain limitations on what you can use the property for. And so adding this limited opportunity for residential use is consistent with what we've heard this evening with other use seems to be meets the hardship criteria.
Okay. And is that consistent with the second?
It is.
All right. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
The vote is 4-1 with Ms. Spector Morgan in the minority. All right, let's move to the Commercial Indoor Recreation Conference Trade or Convention Center.
I will make a motion to deny those use variances because I believe they will alter the essential character of the neighborhood. They will result in a diminution of surrounding property values. They will not result in substantial justice, and there is no unnecessary hardship based on the factual findings we've already discussed.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, the vote is unanimous. Those two variances are not granted. Now, as to the parking spaces,
Do we need to even deal with it?
well, I'm wondering if we don't because of the residential use requiring parking that we've approved.
But they have that parking. Residential use only requires 5 spots, and they have that.
They have the 5. Is that the case? All right. Then we could table the parking question.
Table or withdraw?
Just deny too, right?
We could deny it. Obviously, we've already said that the use is not going to fly, so the parking presumably is no longer needed. I don't know why we need to act on it at all, really. But it depends on what the board wants to do.
You know what, why don't we act on it just in case our decision gets overturned? On the other one, the court will have our reasoning on the parking.
All right?
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Spoken like someone who knows what she's doing.
I would move to deny the parking variance on the basis that with 113 spots required, and even if you sort of combine the conference and recreation parking with the commitment that they'll never be rented to separate groups, they only have 29 spots, or 38 spots if you include the ones on the other property. And the ones on the other property, as have been pointed out, we're sort of double dipping on those, even though they'll be used at different times. I just don't think it's sufficient parking in this tight of a neighborhood. I think allowing this limited amount of parking on site would alter the essential character of the neighborhood because of the number of the cars it would force into on-street parking. I don't think it will diminish surrounding property values. I think that there is a benefit to the public that outweighs the hardship to the applicant in ensuring that all properties have their required parking on site. And while there's a hardship with this site being small, the hardship is really exacerbated by the uses they want to make of the property, which aren't allowed in the district anyway. So I don't think it meets any of the variance criteria.
Very good. Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The vote is unanimous, and that brings us to the shared parking arrangement question and the 606.1 feet. And I had a thought on that when I was looking at it. It wasn't raised, but I had a concern about this, which is the appellant made the case in their written testimony, and they may have also in the spoken testimony, that there's actually about 100 and some foot pathway to the parking. But that requires, and it's, I suspect, what people would use. That requires going through property that does not belong to the appellant and is not under the control of the appellant. And it may or may not be with the permission of the people whose property it is. So I don't think that flies in my mind as a mitigating factor. So I think we'd have to look at the 606 feet and whether or not there's anything peculiar about the situation that creates a hardship that allows it to be so far away. And from my point of view, I don't see it.
I don't see it either. The purpose of the requirement is clearly to ensure that the supplemental parking is close to the property. And while this is only divided by one property, it's a fairly big property. And I think people are going to walk right through that pocket neighborhood and not go around on the sidewalk.
That's what I do. And then I'd say, gee, I wonder if this is all right while I was doing it.
So
Nice houses they have here.
It could alter the essential character of the neighborhood and cause a diminution of surrounding property values as well.
Because of the traffic?
Yes.
Foot traffic?
Yes.
Okay. Would anyone care to make a motion on this one?
I'll move to deny for the reasons we just discussed.
Second? Anyone?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion to deny, please say aye. Aye. Anyone in opposition? The ayes have it in unanimous vote. And that takes care of case 0002823 and brings us down to the last case on our regular agenda this evening, which is, has several numbers here, which is a new experience for me, but I guess it has to do with our software.
Part of it is the software, and part of it is that there's more than one property.
Okay. Well, we'll hear them all. 0029, 0030, 0031, and 0032. It sounds like several people in the Secret Service. 391 Loudon Road, GWP Gateway Performance District, Bradcar Holdings, LLC. Note, these are lots 46Z39 and 46Z38, to your point. The owner wishes to expand their operations and seeks variances to Article 2884C1, expansion of a non-conforming use to allow the construction of an 8,250 square foot addition, 88.5%, and expansion of the outdoor storage area in support of the existing non-conforming sales, rental, and repair of construction equipment, use J3, where such use is not permitted. The Article 28537A relief required setbacks to allow outdoor storage 10 feet from a street where 50 feet is required. Article 28537B, screening requirements to allow outdoor storage without screening from view from adjacent streets and properties. And finally, Article 28537D, maximum area of lot to be used or designated for outside storage to allow a storage ratio of 2.25 to 1, where 1.3 to 1 is allowed, outside storage is allowed. Is that sentence?
Typo.
A typo. Where 1.31 is allowed. You all swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Very good. If you would hold your testimony for a moment until our fifth member returns.
I figured it would take you a while to read them all.
It took me a while, but
It's a mouthful.
not long enough.
I'm glad they weren't all here for us, I guess.
No, gentlemen, as you testify, would you identify yourselves for the record, please?
Happy to. My name is Brian Bouchard. I'm an attorney at Sheehan, Finney, Bass & Green in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I represent the applicants, Bradcar Holdings, LLC, which does business as Chappelle Tractor. With me tonight is Brenton Cole from Granite Engineering and the owners of the business and the property, Corey and Brad. I'll begin my remarks briefly just by saying that my clients have owned and operated a tractor sale, repair, and leasing operation from 6 Black O'Day, or Break O'Day Drive since around 2017. Before then, at that same lot, the almost, I would say, identical or very similar business was operated by E.W. Sleeper since, I believe, sometime in 1950. So this is an operation that has been occurring on that specific lot for, let's say, close to 60 or 70 years. And that location has been successful. My clients have then purchased the lot sort of, I would say, in behind at 0 Braco Day Drive, and are seeking to expand operations, mostly storage operations, onto that lot. And the time has come to really, improve the lot that has been grandfathered use for these past 65 years as well. And that, of course, requires some variants that Mr. Chairman already went through, so I'm not going to repeat myself in going through them again. I think the best way to proceed here is to have Mr. Cole present what the project is, briefly, of course, and that will give you a sense of the idea of what we're looking to do here, and should make my job a little easier.
Thank you, Brian. So for those of you unfamiliar with the property, I put together kind of a color sketch behind you. As you can see, the properties are surrounded by Loudon Road to the east, Braco Day Drive to the west, and then I-393 to the north. The existing property has a 9,000 square foot building on it. There's 4 service bays that EW Sleeper had used, that Chapel Tractor uses today, with a small sales room and office for employees. That building is surrounded by a series of paved parking and mainly gravel, where their operation is stored. That's where their fleet storage is, equipment from repairs, and most importantly, their sales. The project that we're proposing is an expansion of the existing building. We're expanding that building by 152 feet to the northeast in order to accommodate 6 service bays. 5 of those service bays will be strictly for repair. 1 service bay will be a very important wash bay. Currently, the facility does not have a wash bay. As you can imagine, with any facility that sells new and used equipment, it is important to have these things clean, presentable as they bring customers in to purchase. In doing the expansion, they're hoping to reorganize the area to make it safer, more efficient for their use, and as well as more presentable for their customers as well as the public. Starting from page left to right, we will reconfigure the parking lot to the far south, make it more code compliant, landscaping, everything that you would see with a traditional parking lot today. Surrounding the property will be 34 spaces. It will be shy of the code, but it is what Chapel Tractor needs. They run 2 other facilities, 3 including this one. They know the parking required. We do have space for the future parking, therefore we'll seek a conditional use permit from the planning board. The newly acquired property to the north is really the important part of this, and that's where they'll store their equipment. They sell excavators, tractors, UTVs, all the heavy equipment that you can imagine, and they need area for this. This allows them to group these in classes. It allows them to group them in the equipment that's already been repaired, equipment to be repaired, new versus used. Everything you could think of would be done to the north on the newly acquired property.
And I'll just jump in. Most of that storage right now is and has been for the past however many years on 6 Braco Day Drive. I keep saying Braco Day Drive. The idea is to relocate that to really a better location that is not directly on Loudon Road.
Correct. And lastly, the part that we would like to retain from the existing property is that the front storage area is really where we showcase the tractors. EW Sleeper has used this property for many years. They've historically used this frontage of Loudon Road. It's right in front of the new building to really showcase the newer equipment. Obviously, that's where the traffic is. We'd like to retain that use. They currently use it there today. It is technically outdoor storage, but we see it more of as a car dealership where you're trying to promote business. We'd like to enjoy and be able to utilize that area. We are seeking the 4 variances tonight. Brian will touch on those. I'll hand it back to you.
Happy to. Yeah, it's 4 or 5 variances, I guess, depending on how you count them. The way I had organized this in my head was to go through the use variances first, and then group together all the outdoor storage variances. But I'm happy to proceed however the board thinks
I
would be
think
more
that sounds
efficient.
fine.
Okay, great.
If we get confused, we'll let you know.
I like that. So moving through the 5 criteria for a variance, as the board well knows, the first 2 criteria are dovetailing factors that are mostly considered jointly. Certainly, if something is within the spirit of the ordinance, it is also satisfies the public interest prong as well. And it has been the opinion of our Supreme Court that those 2 prongs are generally satisfied unless the granting of the variance would alter the essential character of the neighborhood or would threaten the public safety or welfare. The property, as we've mentioned, is in the Gateway Performance District, and the description for that district is that it is established to provide for well-designed, large-scale commercial development along arterial streets, entrances to the cities. Permitted uses will be predominantly commercial and may include both individual and mixed-use developments of retail, restaurant, service, and office uses. It is our opinion that the proposal here, in terms of uses, aligns with that description of the Gateway District. Went a little too forward in my slides. This is a high-end construction equipment dealership. This isn't some type of backwoods tractor supply depot. My clients take pride in the way that their building looks. They take pride in the way that their area is landscaped. Right now there's already a beautiful sign out front, and they want to attract clientele to this area. And so they are concerned, or they're not concerned, but they are devoted to making sure that this project looks the part for a gateway property. The idea of adding approximately 8,000 square foot addition onto that existing building, we don't believe would alter the essential character of the neighborhood in terms of a use, because the existing lot at 6 Braco Day Drive has been used for that exact purpose for 50 to 70 years. And in that time, we don't believe that there has been really any threats to public safety, no complaints of active nuisance, or anything that would jeopardize the public health, safety, and welfare. In fact, that pertains to expanding the nonconforming use. Relevant to a use variance, or not, those really don't exist anymore, but a use variance for the back lot at 0 Braco Day Drive, it is our position that is also within the spirit of the ordinance here, because it would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. Really, all we're talking about doing is moving the outdoor storage of inventory from the front lot, which presses right up against Loudon Road, to a more secluded and screened lot in the rear, where the only neighbors are Chappelle Tractor itself, a Interstate Highway 393, and then to the east there are some utilities. So for that reason, we believe that the use variances we've requested won't alter the spirit of won't alter the essential character of the neighborhood at all. Regarding substantial justice being done, again, this is the balancing factor. We believe that there is nothing to be gained by denying the use variances that we've requested, and nothing to be gained by denying the outdoor storage variances, although I'm going to get to those in a minute. In fact, we think this is going to be a net benefit for the area, and that the inventory that is currently stored so close to Loudon Road is going to be moved to a better location, and once these 2 lots are joined, we plan to do a lot line adjustment. It's really going to make for a more efficient and, I guess I say, ergonomic use of the property. For those same reasons, it's not going to result in any diminution of value. We can't see how reconfiguring the property in this manner and allowing a use on that back lot that currently isn't allowed under the zoning ordinance would diminish values at all. Because again, this is a use that, at least on the front lot at 6 Braco Day Drive, has been going on for, 60 to 70 years. Finally, with respect to the hardship, I'll take each lot individually. With respect to the front lot, the existing lot at 6 Break O'Day Drive, again, the special condition or unique feature of that lot is that there is a grandfathered use on that property that has been in existence for decades. And it is our opinion that extending or allowing a reasonable expansion of that use through the building you see there, or denying it would result in an unnecessary hardship to our clients, because we cannot fairly say that the ordinance prohibiting this type of use of the sale, repair, or retail of large commercial equipment bears a substantial and fair relationship to this property anymore when it's been used for that exact purpose for decades. A similar analysis applies to the back lot, and it's our opinion that it's inconsistent to suggest that the prohibition on the uses that we're requesting here bears a fair and substantial relationship to the back lot when the primary lot right in front, again, has had that use for decades. And so for those reasons, we think that we meet the 5 criteria for a variance for a use. Moving on to the other variances concerning outdoor storage. I think I have some preliminary notes here. The first, one of the variances we're requesting is to have a showcase of tractors and large commercial equipment right next to, or not right next, but is that a power?
Yeah,
Yeah, you want to highlight that? So that, the ordinance requires a 50-foot setback. We're proposing a 10-foot setback. And the other variance we're requiring is to have outdoor storage of inventory that is not screened. And finally, the variance, the final variance is to have exceed the maximum storage area allowed on this property for outdoor storage. Currently, the storage that is being used on these lots is 43,000 square feet. The goal of this proposal is to split that storage, move the preponderance of it to the back lot, where only on the front lot you'll approximately have 4,500 square feet of storage. And it's going to result in a net reduction of storage from 4,300 square feet to 3,900 square feet. Going through the variance criteria, we do not believe that the proposal will alter the essential character of the neighborhood, nor do we believe that it would threaten the health, safety, and welfare. Focusing on the display area first, Concord currently allows at section 28.519 allows for the outdoor display, allows for an outdoor display area for the sale or leasing of motor vehicles, recreational vehicles, and recreational equipment. Those are mostly for car dealerships. We do not believe that this is materially different. Because Concord allows for car dealerships to promote its inventory in a display area, we think that a variance allowing tractors to be displayed as well fits within the spirit of the ordinance.
And is that area currently being used for outdoor storage?
It is currently being used for outdoor storage. We believe that it is grandfathered. It has been used for outdoor storage for decades.
I hear you.
But I can't represent to you, having taken that oath, that it is grandfathered. Certainly, it's not going to change anything that anyone probably has a recollection about. Regarding the variance from screening, again, we don't think that is going to be any different from what's been currently used. Right now, most of the inventory is located on that front lot by Loudon Road. By moving that inventory to a lot that has no access to Loudon Road, and whose only neighbors are an interstate and a utility line, that is going to comply with the spirit of the ordinance and certainly isn't going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood when that storage already exists. Same thing for the requirements to exceed the maximum percentage of a lot allowed for that storage. And I'll note here as well that it seems when you read the ordinance that the storage requirement or the requirement in the ordinance that says that you have to screen the storage of inventory, that seems to be written for an enterprise who has outdoor inventory that isn't its primary business. I'll give you an example. If you have a machining shop that has to store outside on pallets all the raw materials that it is going to use to create whatever widgets it's going to create, you can understand why that may want to be screened from, you know, adjacent streets and adjacent properties because it can be maybe an obnoxious view. The outdoor storage that we're talking about here is the very product that undergirds this business. It is the sale of those equipment. It is the rental of that equipment. So it's our position that the prohibition as written doesn't really align with this specific enterprise to begin with. Again, car dealerships are allowed to do the same thing. Turning now to substantial justice, again, we believe that this will result in a net benefit to the area and that the only possible harm is harm to my client. To the extent that any neighbors don't enjoy the view of these tractors, well, they are going to be moved to a better location that is more screened from them and is more appropriate for the storage of this large material. Same thing with diminution of value. This is an operation that has been ongoing on this property for decades. The whole purpose here is just to really move storage from one area to the other. The ordinance, you know, requires screening with an opaque fence, which I would guess would be 6 to 8 feet. I'm not sure how effective that is going to be if you have a large excavator that is 24 feet high. So it seems like those ordinance, again, don't bear a really fair and substantial relationship to the use, which again brings me back to hardship. This is a uniquely situated property, actually 2 pieces of property. One has an ongoing grandfathered operation. The second, the back lot, is really perfect for this type of situation. It has no outlet to Loudon Road. It has no neighbors that we can speak of or find. And we think that both of these properties are uniquely situated for the storage of outdoor materials in the way that we are describing. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board members may have.
Do I understand that the setback relief required for the display of the equipment is actually a condition that already exists?
It is a condition that already exists. I can tell you that it has existed for decades. Whether it is grandfathered or not, I cannot say for certain. I believe it is. We believe it is. But it is certainly something that is ongoing and was ongoing at the time my clients purchased the property.
Dr. Hutton, how did you look at that?
So the way we looked at it was there's been expansion of the use of this lot over the years. And so the goal of these variances is to bring the entire project into compliance with the current standard.
Yeah,
or get relief.
Or get relief, right.
And I would also say that with respect to the storage of equipment so close to the road, if this were a car dealership, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Because my understanding under the way the ordinance is written is that cars are allowed to be stored in a display area. Tractors are not so expressly allowed under the ordinance.
Is that also your view?
It is.
Okay. Other questions from the board?
The storage ratio, when that was calculated, was that calculated looking at the combined lot or just the one lot?
I believe it was combined, but I'm gonna look at.
My understanding is combined, and the goal here is to move the preponderance of the storage to that back lot, and it's going to result in a net reduction of outdoor storage anyway, from 43,000 square feet approximately to 3,900 square feet approximately.
It is the goal to merge these lots, and so that's why that was mentioned in the
Certainly, we're already exceeding it and have for many years.
Your appeal presupposes the merger.
It does, yeah. We're not going to go forward with the merger if the plan is not approved by the ZBA. Of course, we have to go to the planning board after this and get appropriate site plans and the like.
Other questions from the board? Anything? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for your time.
Is there anyone here who wishes to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who wishes to be heard in opposition to it? Any comments from code enforcement?
I don't think so. My only comment was about the merger, and I think we covered that.
Okay, and you had that in your memo to us,
I
too?
did.
Yeah, very good. With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. We have a request for variances for setbacks, lot coverage, and use. We heard testimony that the use is an ancient one on this site, going back to 1950, preceding the zoning ordinance, and that there are some peculiar characteristics to the lot having to do with what surrounds it. Nick, how do you look at it?
Looks good to me.
Okay, that's pretty good. Looks good to Nick. I don't think we need to go any further. I think we've covered the bases here.
We heard, I commend the presenters for a very detailed review of the 5 criteria, and I think based on that,
Okay.
I tend to support it.
I agree.
Ted?
I'll do a little more detail.
Okay.
Just to help Dr. Hutt. I'm in support of all 4 of the variances. I think there will be no impact to the neighborhood or a problem with public health, safety, or welfare. The use exists, the outdoor storage exists. This just sort of reconfigures and expands it a little bit. There really aren't any surrounding properties to diminish the value of. I don't think there's any gain to the public from denying the variances, and I think the lot is unique in its previous use, in its location, in its sort of built-in screening, and in its configuration.
I just think it's a good project, and the fact that they're here cleaning up the zoning structures is helpful, so. Like Nick, I'm sorry, what did you say? Looks good to him? Looks really good to me.
Yeah. It looks the same to me. Would anyone care to make a motion for all 4 variances?
I move to approve all 4 variances based on the findings of fact we've discussed.
Is there a second? There's a move to second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variances are granted. You're good to go.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We do have a couple of other pieces of business before we break up the party. One is something that Laura would like to run by us.
So, as we all know, changes to the law require us to make, findings of fact now, and so Jim put together these handy dandy little forms for us, which I think are great. But this is the first month we're looking at them, so I think there should be some changes sort of to how they're set up. I don't have any problem with the substance of the factual findings, just sort of to the format. So just 4 things that I want to run through, and Jim wanted me to make a motion, which is why we're discussing this. The title on all the draft ones are order granting or denying a variance. I think it should say order granting a variance or order denying a variance, so that when you pick it up, you know what it is. There is no explanation in the introduction as to what the variance that was granted is. I would like to see that in these documents. The criteria are set up as questions, so I think the questions either need to be answered, yes or no, or those statements need to be rephrased. So, for example, the one I'm looking at, did the applicant provide proof that demonstrates the variance will not be contrary to the public interest? And then it just says this conclusion is based on the following findings of fact. So I think we need to say yes, and then this conclusion is based on the following findings of fact. And then the only other thing was they're pre-populated with a signature date of 2022, so that needs to be changed. So I would make a motion to amend the findings of fact forms to address those issues.
This is for the variance one only?
This is
or-
for all of them going forward.
Okay. Now, the sample that we saw last month for the special exception had some things in it. That's
Yep,
gone away?
That's gone away.
Okay,
We
good.
use the standards that are actually in your ordinance.
Yeah, okay, good. Any discussion on this matter?
No, but I'll start off by saying, sounds good to me.
We've got the ringing endorsement of Brother Wallner here.
So either it looks good or sounds good.
Yeah. All right. Would you care to make a motion?
I make a motion that we make those changes on these forms and going forward.
Is there a second?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded, or moved and moved? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Sounds like we're good. And
And with
lastly-
that, I would make a motion to approve all of the findings of fact that you put in our packet.
And the minutes.
And the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? That, I believe, takes care of this evening's business, unless there's something I missed out on. No? Very good. Thank you,
Oh,
everyone.
wait.
What?
One thing. So there's somebody who's been sitting here all night, watching the meeting, who wants to introduce herself.
Well, then let's meet her.
I just came to observe. I'm Brenda Perkins, and I'm hopefully potentially your alternate.
We've met before, Brenda.
One of us, one of
We've
us.
met several times. We've worked together or hang out together a couple times a month on the Kiwanis.
By the way, there's a former Kiwanian right here.
Right,
Years
yes,
ago.
that's
Yeah,
right.
that's right. Yeah, I was cashiered, but it wasn't my fault.
Yeah. But I'm really looking forward to it. It was good business. I was, listening to a lot of it as a real estate agent. I guess I kind of hope I can bring perspective. There were a few times I wanted to, like when they talked about the increase in value. Yep, that happened to every single property over the last 2 years. Things like that. You had two opinions, one increasing the value, one saying it would be a detriment. When they talked about the parking and they left out North State Street, well, the reason they left out North State Street is because North State Street is split by an island in that section, and the parking would be dangerous on that section of North State Street. So I just found it all very, very interesting. So I don't know what I'm allowed to say or not say. I'm sure I'll be picking your brains as we go along. Anyone willing to advise me or go for coffee? I appreciate it.
You bet. Anytime.
Can you advise how much we get paid for this?
Yeah. But I'm glad, I'm happy to contribute.
You
I've,
focused on that tonight, Nick.
I was secretary for the Concord Business Group, which became a committee of the chamber, so I've kind of been sitting in and hearing a lot of what's been happening in Concord. So I'm excited to, continue being involved in the city and getting more involved in it. And
Well, we look forward to having you. And
We love the enthusiasm.
yeah. Well,
By all
as
means,
I'm
if-
just getting started, I'm like, you guys are full of energy to keep it up this late.
Yeah, that's a sham.
It's
We're all
actually
about
an
to
early
collapse.
night for us.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
What does next month look like?
So I don't actually physically have any applications right now. The deadline's on Monday, and I know there's like a whole bunch of stuff out there looming. So I don't know exactly what next month's gonna look like, but I don't predict it's gonna be particularly bad. Cause the ones that are coming in aren't, like, they're not 135s and chapel tractors. They're smaller projects. Complicated issues sometimes, but smaller projects that are a little easier to get through. You guys got through tonight like champs.
Yeah, we got lucky with the first couple.
Yeah, we did.
Didn't take too
So that
long.
would be April 5th, right?
That is April 5th. And I
will toast
to-
a glass of wine to all of you while
think
I'm
he
in
wants us
France.
to adjourn.
Oh, you're going to France?
I'm going to France.
I think we need to adjourn.
Uva
Oh,
too.
yes, we'll
Chris,
adjourn.
can I make a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
So moved.
Second.
Well, thank you. It was nice
Yeah.
meeting all of you, and I'll
Thank you.
look forward to next month.
And Brenda, if you do want to get together for a cup of coffee.